What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto was a spy from another nation, and his entire life in Konoha was a lie? If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments, and also check the description to original creator of this beautiful creation. It all started because Naruto had pen pals. But for convenience, let's start a little earlier. Naruto was the last living apprentice of Jiraiya of the Sannin, Konoha's most important spy master, and was therefore tacitly expected to take over for his mentor. But after the war, when Tsunade finally got around to asking what had become of the old pervert spy network, Naruto's answer had been a blank stare. At further, and rather panicked, prompting, Naruto revealed that Jiraiya had not passed the network on to him. During their travels, while Jiraiya was off meeting with his contacts, he had left Naruto to wander the streets on his own. With some embarrassment, Naruto admitted he didn't know who any of Jiraiya's contacts were, and didn't have a single one of his own. No, Naruto had pen pals. Village intelligence was horrified to learn. All he had were some friends he had made in his travels who he tried to keep in contact with. People he had helped on his journey, people who had helped him. Hundreds of them in fact. Across the globe and in all walks of life. From a fisherman in a little, out-of-the-way peasant village in tea country to merchants in stone. Scullery maids in noble houses to daimyo's daughters. It took a shamefully long time, almost 3 months, for anyone to realize what this meant. When it finally occurred to Shikamaru that what any normal, well-functioning, sane shinobi would call a contact, Naruto might very well call a pen pal, he stopped where he was, turned on his heel, marched to the nearest wall, and began his earnest attempt to bash his head against it until he lost consciousness. The only reason he failed was because two chunin and a very confused clerical nin were eventually able to pry him away. Once it was understood that Konoha's spy networks were as widespread as ever, though going by a decidedly friendlier name, the mass panic that had existed throughout the upper ranks began to calm. But not completely. After all, Naruto hadn't been in personal contact with many of these so-called pen pals for years. He hadn't made physical contact, hadn't done anything to maintain their loyalty long-term. So it was decided that he would go on another trip, as Jiraiya often had in the past, to check in. There was only one small problem with this. Naruto, newly promoted and village hero that he was, had just taken on his first genin team the previous week. But then again, long-term training trips had never hurt anything, right? When is that boy going to report in? Homura Mitokado demanded impatiently. His team was spotted approaching the gates almost an hour ago. Now, Mitokado-san, I'm sure he's just escorting his genin to their homes before coming, Kakashi soothed, glancing up from his book. After all, the gate guards would have told him to report directly to the Hokage's office. Tsunade grunted in affirmation. She was as excited as the next person that the brat was back, especially because retirement was starting to look better and better and Naruto kind of had to be in Konoha for her to do that. But Kaharu and Homura were going to be hanging around until this was over and they refused to let her drink in her office. The sooner this report was over, the sooner she could get properly sloshed in celebration. There was a sudden scuffling from out in the hall. The 4 shinobi in the office turned to face the door just as Iruka pushed through the entrance, red-faced with exertion and smiling gleefully. Hokage-sama, I just heard, Naruto was seen entering the village. I can't believe he's finally back after a whole year. And his genin are. He trailed off as he finally realized that not only were Tsunade and Kakashi in the office, both people he knew would be as excited as him to see the blonde again, but so were the 2 elderly village counselors. His smile slowly faded, replaced with a vivid blush. Never mind, I'll just come back later, he said as he edged backwards out of the room. Get in here, Iruka, Tsunade sighed, leaning back in her chair. Naruto's about to come in, and we all know you're going to hear everything he tells us over ramen if you don't now. Iruka stammered a little, flustered, but quickly subsided and took a place by Kakashi's side. He did want to see Naruto after all. I can't believe it's been a year already, Tsunade sighed as she leaned back in her chair. I want to see what the brat has done with those genin of his. I'm sure he's done a fine job, Iruka cut in before he could stop himself. He knew it wasn't exactly his place, especially with the more traditional counselors in attendance, but he had full faith in the young blonde. Ah, Kakashi agreed. Naruto is sure to have taught the children well and to have had a successful trip. He smiled. After all, there have been no reports of mass destruction or war being declared on Konoha. Kakashi-sensei's mean. Came the protest from the window. As one, the shinobi turned. Hey, Naruto waved with a wide grin. There was a wave of reflexive smiles in return. Even Homura and Koharu were glad to have the vibrant young man home. And the year seemed to have treated him well. Naruto had grown nearly 2 inches, his bangs hung long into his laughing eyes, and his skin was tanned and rosy as ever. Welcome home, brat, Tsunade said with a fond smile. Glad to see you haven't blown anything up. Naruto laughed and scratched the back of his head, ha ha, about that. Tsunade's smile froze. Kakashi lifted his hands in a calming gesture. Ma, I'm sure it wasn't that bad. Yeah, Naruto jumped to agree. Nothing actually blew up. Well, nothing important, he amended. The others let out sighs of relief. These things were expected to happen during even lightest of shinobi training. So as long as it was nothing the village would have to pay for, no one really cared. So what did you mean? Koharu asked warily. Well, you know how me and Kurama are friends now? Naruto said a little nervously, glancing at the counselors out of the corners of his eyes. Yeah, I know, Tsunade said with a roll of her eyes. Seriously, this kid would call a tree his friend if it stood still and listened to him talk. Which was probably why he liked gardening so much, come to think of it. So I let him out of the seal. There was a single, perfect moment when every adult in the room, men and women who had known Naruto in one manner or another since he was a tiny child, believed he was joking. It didn't last long. How could you do something so monumentally stupid? So uncompromisingly dangerous, and reckless, and treasonous, you stupid child? The blonde scowled. I knew what I was doing. And it's not like I just let him out. There was kind of a situation, okay? Kind of a situation, Tsunade muttered to herself in horror. Releasing the seal, Naruto could have died from that alone and she'd heard nothing, the brat. Yep, Naruto agreed, finding himself a seat at the edge of the Hokage's desk. But don't worry, I handled it. Handled it by releasing an evil, 400-foot-tall, fox demon. Koharu raged. Not exactly, an amused voice purred from the floor near the window. This time when the occupants of the room whipped around, it was a red-furred, chakra-infused, nightmare-inducing demon who greeted them. He was also 2.5 feet tall. With a canine laugh, the fox trotted to sit at Naruto's feet, all 9 of his tails waving happily behind him. Oh, Naruto exclaimed into the horrified stillness of the room. This is the first time I've gotten to introduce you because he was always trapped in my stomach. He reached out and clapped the fox on his shoulder. This is Kurama. Do not introduce us to that filthy beast. Homura snarled. At least you retained some small margin of sense and did not release it entirely, but even this is a reprehensible dereliction of your duty. The fox snarled, hackles raised and lips pulled back to expose vicious fangs. Say that again, he hissed, growing rapidly in size even as his chakra gathered around him, killing intent so thick that. Bad, Naruto reprimanded sharply, the squirt bottle he had summoned to his hand still held aloft after spraying a burst cold water in the Biju's face. Kurama yelped, then whined, rapidly shrinking even as his chakra dissipated. Why the hell did you? Bad, the blonde sprayed again. Don't do that, the mighty beast whimpered, hiding his muzzle between his paws. Then don't make me, Kurama, Naruto said sternly even as he returned the bottle to the storage seal on his wrist from which it had come. He held his stern expression for another few seconds before crumpling and scratching the still oversized fox between the ears. Just don't do it again. Yeah, whatever, that's the spot. The fox muttered happily, snuggling down to rest his head against Naruto's knee. The gathered shinobi could only stare blankly. Homura shook his head. You treat the Kyuubi like a pet? Hey, Naruto glared at the man. I do not. This is just how I train people. And Kurama's got to learn when his behavior isn't acceptable. Yes, like you would train a pet, Koharu suggested helpfully. No way, the blonde dismissed, nose wrinkled in distaste. I train my genin team the exact same way. There was a single moment of frozen horror as that statement sunk in. Naruto, Kakashi said as delicately as he could manage. What, exactly, do you mean by that? That's right, Naruto said, perking up. I haven't shown any of you my team since we got back. They're doing so well, you're all going to be so proud of them. And me, I taught them a whole lot. Why yes, I'm sure we will be. Tsunade gave a wooden smile and whispered out of the corner of her mouth to the nearest person, who happened to be Iruka, hold my hand. The man gave her the look a startled rabbit gives a salivating wolf. Wah, I said hold it. No fool, Iruka held her hand. Naruto graced them with a giddy grin before turning and leaning toward the open window. Duckies, he hollered for the whole village to hear. There was an awkward silence. When the seconds continued to tick by with only Naruto's cheerful humming to break the silence, and no genin miraculously appeared, the group began to shift uncomfortably. After an entirely silent conversation, communicated only in sharp gestures and a quick jab to the ribs, Kakashi stepped out of the huddle. So, he began, looking off kilter even under his mask, He glanced back to the others for help, but Iruka just made a shooing motion at him. So, he started again, turning back to Naruto. Why do you call them duckies? Oh, Naruto bounced slightly where he sat, grin widening into a full-on beam. It's because they always follow each other around in a line. And sometimes, don't tell them I told you or they'll get mad. They follow me around like that too. It's so cute. Don't tell them that, an annoyed voice demanded sulkily from the other side of the room. As one, the assembled shinobi whipped around to face the voice that had somehow managed to take a position at their backs. Duckies, Naruto greeted with a broad grin. He turned his attention back to the older group of shinobi and introduced, everybody, these are my duckies. Duckies, this is everybody. Don't call us that, the tallest genin, a boy with spiky brown hair and a thin scar that just missed his green eyes, complained. The girl, the one who had spoken before, buried her face in her hand so that her short lavender bangs fell forward. If you have to keep calling us that, at least don't introduce us that way, Naruto-sensei. The Hokage knows me as Ducky, now, the shortest member of the team muttered to himself in horror. I now have no future as a shinobi. The young blonde teacher rolled his eyes. Come on, guys, it's not that bad. Says you, came the discontented mutter from one of the children. Naruto ignored it. Anyway, the proud Junin-sensei continued, if they're so unhappy with duckies, which I meant with love, by the way, then these are Kosada, the short boy waved shyly, Takashi, the taller boy gave a two-finger salute, and Megumi, the girl smiled in the what can you do way that all those closely acquainted with Naruto picked up eventually. Iruka studied the children with interest. They hadn't been in any of his classes at the academy, so he really didn't know too much about them besides the most general information. Takashi was from a civilian family, Kosada and Megumi from very minor clans. All three had been known to be middle-of-the-road students with high potential, but they have impressive stealth. More than impressive really, for genin to sneak up on the caliber of shinobi gathered in the office. Yes, Kakashi agreed, once more behind his book. How did you manage to drill that into them so young? That one was easy, the blonde said, standing and propping a hand on his hip. So I realized something recently. I used to wear bright orange. Awkward silence number 2 ensued, with only the sound of Tsunade facepalming to interrupt. He, Naruto laughed awkwardly, before clearing his throat. I mean, I used to wear bright orange, and regularly escape from Anbu as a kid. That is impressive, Iruka began, but I don't see how. I made them all wear orange jumpsuits until I was satisfied with their skills. Naruto proclaimed proudly. There was a collective shudder from the genin. Do you know how badly orange clashes with lavender hair? Megumi demanded with haunted eyes. Do you? It was awful, Takashi agreed. Megumi elbowed him. Iruka hummed contemplatively. An unusual approach, but apparently effective. Maybe we can implement it in the general student body. No, Tsunade cut off. Iruka started, but the results. No. Tsunade slanted the man a look that had him shutting his mouth and instinctively sliding behind Kakashi for protection. I knew you were my favorite Hokage for a reason, Megumi said reverently. The male counselor shook his head. That's all very well, but you are missing the point. To have our ninja so degraded. I'm not degrading them, Naruto protested, looking truly upset. I only do it because it works. Besides, they don't mind. He turned to look at the kids, hefting the quickly retrieved squirt bottle into the air as a visual aid. Do you? But at the quick motion of the spray bottle, The three took an instinctive step backwards. Kosada whimpered a little. Naruto blinked, then looked from the bottle in his hand to the three genin. Running his free hand through his hair, he asked, "Would you really rather be punished with something else? Like, a timeout would work, right?" Squirt bottle. Takashi blurted immediately before scurrying to his teacher's side. Squirt bottle. Megumi agreed quickly before joining the boy. Kosada hesitated, eyeing the hated spray bottle fearfully. Naruto crossed his arms, considering. "If you'd really rather, Kosada, I could." Squirt bottle. The boy squeaked before hurrying to hide behind his taller teammates. "Well, there you have it," Naruto said, satisfied, as he turned back to the group. "They're all happy with it, and it works. The point is, you shouldn't be punishing them at all for minor infractions," Tsunade graded out. "Why?" Naruto asked with real surprise. "Children need boundaries, right? That's what Iruka-sensei always used to say, and he's the best teacher ever." Tsunade turned a vitriol glare on the schoolteacher. Iruka glanced around at his superiors, all giving him dirty looks, and sighed. "And I'm out of that job," he muttered under his breath. "What was that?" the blonde asked innocently. "Nothing," the man sighed. "Okay," Naruto said slowly, before continuing. "Besides, it's not like I always punish them. I reward them when they're good, and a lot of the time I don't even need to because I find ways to motivate them." Out of morbid curiosity more than anything else, Kakashi asked, "And how exactly did you do that?" Here Naruto paused. "I found ways." Flashback. "But Naruto-sensei," Kosada whined as he sat at the bottom of a great tree, "you don't have great chakra control, and you're a really strong shinobi." "Yeah, why do we have to do something this tedious when we won't even need it?" Takashi demanded. "I have enough control to tree climb," the teacher pointed out to his slacking students. The three, each at the base of their own tree, glared up at him sullenly. Naruto scratched the back of his head in thought. "Well, I guess in general I get past having lousy control by having huge reserves. And I have that because I'm a Jinchuriki." Here he paused contemplatively. "I've never really known of anyone who wanted to become one before, but I do know the seal, and I'm sure we could find a few minor demons around here somewhere," he said while absently reaching for his best sealing brush. There was a beat of silence, and then the kids ran for their trees. End flashback. Kakashi opened his mouth to ask, but Tsunade cut him off. "Don't, Kakashi. I don't think I could take it just now." The Junin shrugged and let it drop. It was probably for the best. Kosada frowned, glancing from his sensei to the adults in the room. "Why are you insulting Naruto-sensei like that?" he demanded. "He's a great teacher. He looks out for us, he trained us really well, and we're way stronger than I thought we would be this soon after graduating." Naruto blinked, then turned to grin widely at the boy. "My students are so awesome," he gushed, reaching out and pat the boy on the head. "Thanks for defending me, Ducky." And with a little sleight of hand, he pulled his hand away and pulled a chocolate out from behind the genin's ear. "Yes," Kosada cheered, grabbing the treat, popping it in his mouth and settling back to bask in his teammates' jealous glares. "Where did I go wrong?" Iruka said faintly as he watched the scene with morbid fascination. "Maybe it was the whole, treating him to ramen when he did well, thing?" Kakashi guessed. "All right, that is it," Tsunade announced suddenly, determination glinting in her eyes. "Let's just not tell anyone about this. If none of this craziness goes further than this room then we won't have any problems." She spun on the blonde teenager, pointing a finger under his chin. "Naruto," she jabbed him in the sternum, "stop petting your genin." Naruto retracted his hand reluctantly with a wounded expression. The three genin glared. They liked when sensei pet them and gave them treats. "And for goodness sakes," the Hokage snapped, "put the Kyuubi back in the—" Here she trailed off as she finally realized that the large, talking, demon fox was nowhere in sight. "Naruto," she said slowly, "where did the Kyuubi go?" Naruto's face screwed up in confusion. "He went to go stretch his legs while we were waiting for the duckies." "You didn't notice?" Awkward silence number 3. Homura made an abortive step forward. Where did it go?" "Ah!" The blood-curdling shriek went up from the village proper, soon joined by the cries of many others. "Damn it, not again," Naruto muttered before jumping onto the windowsill, trusty squirt bottle already in hand. "Hang on for just a second, Ba-chan. I got this." And he was gone. "I need sake to deal with this." Everyone blinked. Kakashi looked to the man at his side. I didn't know you drank, Iruka. The teacher pinched the bridge of his nose to try and stop the pounding in his head. I do now. Naruto sighed as he finally collapsed into his favorite stool in front of Ichiraku's. He had had a long day. First he had to make the long trek with the duckies into the village. Then he had that meeting in Tsunade Ba-chan's office. And then Naruto had been forced to chase Kurama down and make him spit out the civilian man he had been, gently, gnawing on. Naruto was almost sure the fox was telling the truth and the man deserved it. Kurama was usually good like that. Still, Kurama was a lot stronger than the man, and once the guy had wet himself it was really just overkill, so the fox had still earned himself a squirt to the face. Kurama was currently grumbling from the seat next to him, body shrunken down to barely the size of a puppy and curled into a discontented ball of fluff. He stared up at Naruto out of one irritated eye. Must you always eat ramen? I want inarazushi. But Ichiraku's is the best food on earth. The blonde protested, without turning away from his eager study of Tuchi's back as his first serving was prepared. At least get udon, the fox growled, all 9 tails flicking with ire. Naruto made a disgusted face. Truthfully, udon wasn't too bad. But it was so close to ramen and yet not that it was more of a tease than a meal. Tuchi, the kind and wise man that he was, looked back over his shoulder at the red ball of fur. How about I put in extra pork, just for you? The Kyuubi considered that, then turned back to Naruto. I understand why you wish for this one to live. That means thanks, Naruto translated absently, hands white-knuckled on the tabletop in anticipation. After a year with no quality ramen he couldn't focus on anything else. Even if he had already spent over an hour here earlier in the day when he was supposed to be going to that meeting with Tsunade, Kakashi, and the elders. Totally worth it. For his part, Tuchi just shrugged and got back to cooking. Most chefs would be upset at having a murderous Biju sitting at their stand, but Tuchi was different. He knew that anyone that was exposed to Naruto long enough was doomed to his way of thinking. And the fox had been the boy's constant companion for 18 years. The Kyuubi hadn't had any choice but to be reformed. It was also a comfort to know that Naruto was willing to fight to the death to protect his favorite source of ramen. And he bet the fox knew it too. Order up, the older man called cheerfully before placing 2 steaming bowls of miso ramen, extra pork for both, on the house, in front of his favorite costumer and the blonde's friend. Naruto grinned, grabbing his chopsticks and clapping his hands together with a brief, "Itadakimasu," before digging in. But he paused with his chopsticks hovering over his bowl. He had been too frenzied on his first stop at the ramen stand to think of it, but sitting here now. It reminded him of when he had first met his duckies. Flashback. Today was a very important day in the lives of his young students. As such, Iruka tried to keep his speech as original and individually directed to his students' personalities as he could each year. Beginning today, you're all real ninja. But you're at the bottom of the barrel, merely rookie genin. I will now assign your 3-man teams, and after lunch your Junin sensei will come to collect you. That was as far as he got before there was a poof of smoke and he was tackled from the side. It was only years-long experience that allowed the man to keep his feet under the unexpected assault. Naruto, he protested, smacking the teenager on the back of the head. What do you think you're doing? The blonde popped back up with a wide grin splitting his face. I'm here to get my genin team. He laughed delightedly. Can you believe I'm going to be a sensei? Not really, no. Iruka muttered to himself grumpily before sighing and giving a small smile. I'm sure you'll do a fine job, but I haven't even started giving out the team assignments yet. Wait a minute. A young voice yelled from the sea of students. Naruto and Iruka turned to face the prospective genin and then flinched in surprise at the manic grins on many of the young faces. Are you telling me that Uzumaki Naruto is taking a genin team this rotation? The same child, a tall boy with brown hair and bright green eyes, demanded. Naruto scratched the back of his head, suddenly nervous. Yeah, I am. The room exploded with noise. Awesome, hell yeah, I'm totally gonna be on his team. Quiet, Iruka snapped, vein pulsing in his temple. The noise continued. Iruka blinked in surprise. That was the first time in memory that Iruka's sensei of death no jutsu failed to have its intended effect. Hee, Naruto laughed by his side. It made him kind of uncomfortable when the older citizens of Konoha made a big deal over him, but he was more than happy to be the kid's hero. Looking back and forth between the blonde's rakish grin and the children's loud chatter, Iruka sighed. There wouldn't be a moment of peace until Naruto left, and he was far too hard-headed to be convinced to leave without his team in tow. Listen up, Iruka called to little effect. He cleared his throat, lifted his clipboard, and read aloud, Team 7. Dead silence. The teacher rolled his eyes heavenward before continuing on. Consists of Kamiya Takeshi, Sagara Megumi, and Himura Kosada. Come to the front and join your new sensei. The silence held for a half-second more before erupting into shouts, cries of outrage, and 3 delighted squeals. The named graduates darted from their seats to line up in front of Naruto. Kosada, the slowest and most nervous of the bunch, got there a moment late and wasn't able to stop on a dime, knocking into Takeshi, who almost sent Megumi sprawling. Hi, Naruto greeted with a manic grin as the children picked themselves back up and brushed themselves off. Without giving them the chance to respond, the blonde yelled, Meet me on the roof. Gave a thumbs up, and disappeared in another poof of smoke. Iruka sighed. Don't mind him, he's been going a little nuts with the poofing since he learned the shunshin last week. He waved them towards the door. Get going, kids, and good luck. By the time the kids had made it up to the roof, Naruto had already been sitting there for some minutes. Unfortunately, it was enough time for nervousness to kick in. Truthfully, Naruto had known he wasn't supposed to enter Iruka's class yet, but he had thought he could rush right past his nerves. And it had worked at first, but they were starting to catch back up with him. What if he couldn't do this? Those kids had been so excited, what if he let them down? Fighting was completely different than having little people depend on him like this. We're here, the tall boy declared as the 3 pre-genin burst through the door and onto the roof. Ah, what the hell? He'd do his best and he could always ask Sakura, Kakashi, Iruka, or Ba-chan for advice as he went. It's not like he'd be totally isolated without any support while he trained the kids. Grin stealing over his face as he watched the kids squirm excitedly in front of him, Naruto decided he wouldn't be remiss to copy his own sensei. Papa squat, kids. And then introduce yourselves. Kosada plopped down where he was, face eager as slightly intimidated. My name's Kosada. I'm Megumi, the girl called brightly, crouching down on her haunches. Takeshi. The tallest kid sat himself down. Ah, Naruto scratched the back of his head. Maybe Sakura had been right to ask for clarification. I wanted a little more than that. Like, here, let me go first. He leaned towards them excitedly. My name is Uzumaki Naruto. My hobbies are pulling pranks, gardening, and eating ramen. I like ramen and training. I dislike the 3 minutes it takes for instant ramen to cook in. Naruto cocked his head and thought. War? Yeah, I don't like that much. I'm going to be the Rokudame Hokage. Unless Ba-chan finds out who really hid her sake. And my dream is to protect Konoha and all my precious people. Quote. A shiver of what could only be described as hero worship went up each child's spine. Their sensei was so cool. Let me go first, Megumi said, nearly bouncing in excitement. My name is Sagara Megumi. My hobby is studying poisons. I like books and practicing throwing senbon, and I dislike when my brother goes away on long missions. My dream is to become a great kunoichi and make it into Anbu. Good for you, purple girl, Naruto said before pointing at the short kid. Kosada stared at Naruto's finger like one of the Nara deer did a speeding fireball. Takeshi sighed and whopped him on the back of the head. The boy jumped and started, right. My name is Himura Kosada. My hobbies are training and cooking. And, you cook? Naruto interrupted in surprise. The boy blushed, ears turning pink, and ducked his head. Why yeah, my mom and sisters are all Junin and they're really busy, so I. Hey, it's not a bad thing. The blonde assured. It's awesome. Now when we go on assignments we won't have to eat what I make. He stuck out his tongue. All I can cook is instant ramen, and Tsunade Ba-chan made an official proclamation that I couldn't eat it on missions after I. Never mind. Oh, the boy stuttered, confused but trying not to show it. I like curry and going on walks, and I don't like when my sisters tease me. My dream is to make my family proud of me. Naruto nodded at the boy in acknowledgement before looking over at the only kid left. The green-eyed boy took that as his cue. I'm Kamiya Takeshi. I like people who are straightforward, and I dislike mind games. He blinked. Does picking fights with tough-looking opponents count as a hobby? You're a shinobi now, Naruto said seriously. Of course it does. Awesome, Takeshi grinned. My dream is to prove that civilian-born ninja can make it as heavy combat shinobi. Wow, Naruto said to himself. I have a really cool team. I hope you guys pass. The three blinked and looked at each other. Naruto-sensei? Megumi said with a raised hand, we already passed. No, you passed the academy test, he corrected before breaking out in an evil grin. Now you have to pass my test or you get sent straight back to the academy. And no one has ever passed before. He neglected to mention this was because he had never actually given a genin test before. He figured it would spoil the mood. By the horrified looks on their faces, he had made the right call. I'm supposed to give it to you guys tomorrow, but the day's still young, right? For some reason, the three preteens got a very bad feeling. We're having the test here? Megumi asked in disbelief. Why? Naruto asked, blinking. What's wrong with it? The kids' faces screwed up in confusion. Should they really have to explain this? It's a ramen stand, sensei. Takeshi explained slowly. It is not. The Junin snapped with sudden anger. It's the best ramen stand on the face of the earth. Now apologize to Tucci-san. The hero worship was starting to wear a little thin. Megumi looked around to see if it was a joke, but when she couldn't find any hidden cameras she muttered, sorry, sir. Kosada bowed at her side. Sorry. Takeshi shrugged and muttered his own apology. For his part, the ramen stand owner just laughed and went back to cooking. If those poor kids passed they were in for a hell of a time. Now sit down so we can get started, Naruto said as he claimed his own seat on one of the middle stools. The pre-genin hesitated for only a few seconds before settling down on either side of their sensei. How is this going to work, Naruto-sensei? Kosada asked, looking around the stand curiously. He couldn't see any hidden traps or anything, and the owner moved like a civilian, not a shinobi undercover, or even one who had retired. So how could this make a test? Right, the blonde said, clapping his hands together once. Because I'm a really nice guy, there are going to be 2 ways to pass this test. Megumi scowled and crossed her arms in front of her chest. If there were 2 ways to pass and still no one had ever done it, that wasn't looking good. The first way, Naruto continued with one finger held up, is to beat me in a ramen eating contest. There was a collective moment of disbelief from the genin. What? Takeshi demanded. How the hell does that have anything to do with being a shinobi? Naruto rolled his eyes. Shinobi face all kinds of weird challenges that they have to overcome to accomplish their mission objectives. And, because it's totally a way for me to get as much ramen as I can eat for free. He grinned. Did you know Junin sensei are reimbursed for any materials used directly in genin training? Best rule ever. The hero worship? Yeah, that was gone. So the 3 of us have to eat more ramen than you do? No, Naruto corrected. Each one of you individually have to eat more than I do. And I can finish 20 bowls without even trying, so you better work hard. Megumi turned slightly green at the very thought of trying to force that much food down. What's the second way? She asked uneasily. Glad you asked, the teacher said with a grin before reaching into his pocket and fishing out a delicate pair of silver bells. The kids stared for a minute. This was getting weirder and weirder. What are we supposed to do with those? Takeshi asked, leaning forward and narrowing his eyes to peer at them. Steal him from me, Naruto said. While we're having an eating contest? The boy asked with confusion. Yup, I'm going to hang them right up here, the blonde said, pointing to a wire that had been strung along the front of the ramen stand about a foot about head height so that it hung from 2 pulleys at either end. Naruto reached up and hung the bells on the wire so that one dangled off in either direction, like a pair of cherries. Then he yanked on the cord and it moved easily along the pulley's track. See, it works like this. The bells will be over my head when we start our contest. If you can get a bell, you pass. If you eat more ramen than me, you win. If your butt leaves the seat, you lose. If you damage the stand in any way, you die. Quote, but then how am I supposed to kick your ass? Takeshi demanded in outrage. Naruto grinned cheekily. You wouldn't be able to do that anyway. The real question, Kosada murmured worriedly, is why are there only 2 bells? Naruto blinked and then glanced back at the pair of dangling bells. Well, would you look at that? There are only 2. He tapped his chin in thought. Guess only 2 of you can pass that way. I hope one of you really likes ramen. But you already said it was basically impossible for us to beat you that way, Megumi protested. It's okay, Naruto assured. You all don't have to pass. Really? Kosada asked hopefully. You mean if only one of us passes then the rest of us will be sent straight back to the academy? Yes. The Junin said with a sage nod. What? Megumi and Takeshi cried in outrage. But Kosada stayed quiet, head bent and discouraged, tears beating at the corners of his eyes, before whispering just loud enough to be heard, so there's really no way to pass? You were tricking us into thinking we could be your team? Naruto crossed his arms over his chest and scowled at them. You're really gonna give up that easy? You guys obviously think you're pretty weak if you're not even going to try. Yeah right, Megumi yelled, shaking her fist. I'll beat your stupid test and then you'll feel like an idiot. Yeah, Takeshi agreed. We can do it. You're gonna have to eat your words. There was silence for a long second before Kosada sniffled and wiped his eyes. Yeah, he said quietly, I'm not gonna give up. He lifted his face to show anger and determination burning in his eyes. We're gonna beat your test. You'll see. Naruto tried to remain the cool and uncaring sensei he was supposed to be for this test. Really he did. It kind of failed when he broke out in the biggest grin yet. Nearly an hour later, and Megumi was ready to hurl. She had eaten 6 whole bowls of ramen. She thought her stomach was going to blow, and she was still 14 bowls behind Naruto-sensei. Even Takeshi, who was by far in the lead of the genin, was 9 bowls behind. Fighting down nausea, she slurped up another noodle. Would throwing up disqualify her? He hadn't actually said it would. And getting the bells seemed to be an even more lost cause than winning the eating contest. Anytime one of them so much as reached in the direction of the cord the bells were hanging off of, something, kunai, shuriken, a napkin dispenser, would come flying at them. And considering they weren't allowed to leave their seats, dodging became an issue. So basically they had already lost. Unless Naruto-sensei felt like being nice and choked on a pork bone, they were about to lose their chance at making it into the shinobi ranks. Megumi bit the inside of her lip trying to bite back a sniffle. She couldn't even use her weapons because Naruto-sensei was sure to dodge and then she would damage the stand, which was one of the main disqualifying rules, and she just really didn't want to test the Junin on the death rule. He seemed a little unstable when it came to ramen. Taijutsu wouldn't work either, not without them being allowed to get up from the stools. Not unless kicking him in the shins was going to do anything. By her side, Takeshi seemed to have realized the same thing. With a groan, his head smacked into bar by his half-empty bowl. What the hell are we supposed to do? He asked morosely. We have to try something, the girl snarled with stubborn determination. Ni-san was so proud that I passed. I'm not letting him down now. Yeah, the brown-haired boy muttered, but what are we going to do? There was a thunk as Kosada let his ramen bowl drop from suddenly lax fingers. Eyes wide, he turned to face his teammates past Naruto's back. I have an idea, he said slowly, barely believing his own words. His teammates perked up and looked over at him, but they didn't really have much hope. This test was impossible. I have an idea, the short boy said again, louder. I have an idea. Naruto finally looked up over the rim of his 20-second bowl of ramen to glance at the kid. What's that? Squirt. Kosada whipped around to face his sensei, leaning forward eagerly. Naruto-sensei, what's your favorite type of ramen? Naruto blinked, and absently slurped a noodle. Well, he said slowly, figuring he might as well play along and more than willing to discuss his ramen preferences. My favorite has always been miso with extra pork. Really? Kosada asked with big, excited eyes. That's awesome. He turned to his teammates. Isn't that awesome, guys? Megumi and Takeshi glanced at each other. The poor boy had cracked under the stress. Sure, mister, Kosada said, the same excitement in his voice as he called to Tucci. Can you make me a bowl of Naruto-sensei's favorite? I want to try it. Sure, the man said with a shrug and got back to cooking. He had been on standby through the test so far, replacing bowls of ramen as fast as the shinobi could eat them. It was a lot more work than he had on a normal day, but then again he was making more money than he usually saw in a week. He'd just add this to the tab. Naruto frowned. Why hadn't he thought of asking for his favorite? Probably because he always got an extra large, and that meant he would eat less bowls. Planning the test, he had been sure he could out-eat these kids, but he never knew. One of them could have been half Akamichi or something. He had thought it was better not to risk it. But if the short kid was going for it anyway. Hey, Naruto-sensei, Kosada said, breaking Naruto from his thoughts and calling his attention back to his potential students. The boy was smiling manically, eyes gleaming with a crazed light. Isn't ramen great? Yeah, the blonde Junin said uneasily. Maybe he had pushed the boy too far? But I mean, isn't it like really, really great? Naruto blinked and considered. Yeah, ramen was really superbly excellent, wasn't it? The blonde nodded decisively. Forget crazy, this kid got it. That's the kind of student he wouldn't mind having. But wait a minute, Naruto frowned. Kosada hadn't seemed too enthusiastic about ramen before his little idea. Was he trying to brown nose his way into passing? Naruto didn't really like the sound of that. Yep, the shortest member of the team continued with the same wild grin on his face. Ramen is the food of champions. Wasting it would be a crime. I totally agree, Naruto said carefully, but what are you? Order up, Tucci cut in as he placed the large, steaming bowl of miso pork goodness in front of the boy. If possible, the kid's grin stretched wider. He reached out and snagged the bowl in both hands. It looks good, doesn't it? The boy leaned in and sniffed loudly. Smells great too. Naruto stared at the bowl of ramen in Kosada's hands. It did look really good. And, even though he was surrounded by ramen, he could swear the smell wafting from the bowl was extra strong. Megumi, always quick on the uptake, held the subtle genjutsu as best she could. But what were they going to do now? The jutsu might hold while they were all perfectly still, but she was nowhere near good enough to keep the blonde distracted if they moved and attracted attention to themselves. As if to reinforce this point, the blonde Junin took that moment to reach back and whack at Takeshi's reaching fingers. The boy yelped and retracted his hand from the bells. Speaking with his eyes, Kosada looked at his teammates and then to the bells. When they stared blankly, he rolled his eyes and repeated the motion again. What? Megumi demanded in a whisper. Why exactly would that work now when it didn't this whole time? Because this, Kosada said loudly before tossing the ramen, bowl and all, into the street. Naruto, Junin that he was, realized what the boy was about to do a split second before he moved. Thankfully he was able to lunge after it and snag it out of the air without spilling even one precious drop. Once assured the ramen was safe and sound in his arms, he turned with murder in his eyes to face the pre-genin. What the hell was that about? He asked angrily. It was only then he noticed the kids each had a smirk on their face. What? As one, Megumi and Takeshi held up a bell. He blinked. Oh, right, he was supposed to be guarding the bells, not the ramen. He frowned and propped the hand not cradling the bowl of ramen to his chest on his hip. So Megumi and Takeshi pass then. He frowned. Too bad Kosada, I'm sure we'll miss you. The grins grew wider. Naruto cocked his head to the side. Naruto-sensei, Kosada said, you're not in your seat. Huh, the teacher said after a long moment of silence as he mentally reviewed the rules. Would you look at that? The short boy flinched as the Junin disappeared from in front of him and reappeared an inch from his side a split second later, face set in a fierce scowl. Sorry, the boy squeaked. I didn't really think about throwing it, I just meant to distract you. But then I thought it might work so I. Takeshi grabbed his shortest teammate by the shoulders and dragged him back towards his chest protectively. Hey, Naruto-sensei, Megumi said with forced cheer as she moved to put herself even with her teammates, so we passed, right? So we can go home and we'll just see you tomorrow? Naruto stared the three preteens down until they were quivering. Then, the corner of his lip twitched. Then again. Then the smile broke over his face and he reached out with a laugh and mussed all of their hair in turn. Yup, you pass with flying colors. Really? The kids all but squealed, eyes bright and eager. Yup, Naruto said with a closed-eye grin before his frown slammed back into place and his eyes opened to reveal burning embers glaring out. But we're going to have a little talk about threatening ramen. Naruto had barely started on his fourth serving when Kurama's ears perked up. The fox blinked lazily and looked up from his bowl of extra pork goodness to peer in the direction his ears had turned, before darting away and down the street. Naruto had just enough time to notice Kurama's absence and frowned thoughtfully before disaster struck. Or Sakura's fist did, rather. Naruto noticed a blur of pink movement out of the corner of his eye at the last moment and threw himself to the side, but the girl's fist still clipped his shoulder. It was enough to send him flying across the street and through the old fence that had loyally stood there for years. Had the gate been sentient, it would have told you that it had been erected before the first Hokage had been elected, before Konoha was Konoha and was still just a loose conglomeration of ninja clans living in ramshackle tents with dreams of a village. It had survived war, invasion, and even Pain's nearly complete destruction of the village 2 years before. It was modest enough to admit that it had had poles replaced and hinges fixed, but in its heart it was that same loyal fence from generations past. Of course, it wasn't sentient, so that was all moot. Besides, rubble was a good new look for it, really. OWWWW. The blonde, who was at least arguably sentient, moaned as he lay in the pile of wreckage. "Hello, Naruto. I didn't expect to see you here," Sakura said with a sweet smile and murder in her eyes. Her red-rimmed, bloodshot eyes surrounded by disheveled pink hair. "After all, you didn't come tell me you were back." Naruto laughed nervously. "About that." Sakura's smile turned just a touch sweeter. "You're my favorite person." Naruto squealed in a desperate attempt to save himself, scuttling backwards through the rubble of his landing. The girl paused and then tossed her hair over her shoulder with a sigh. "Calm down, it's not like I'm going to hurt you." "Yeah, cuss you didn't do that already," the blonde muttered. The girl twitched. "What was that?" "Nothing. I mean, Sakura-san," Teuchi greeted warmly, completely dismissing the duo's antics. However long Naruto's absence, he was still used to Team 7. "You're regular? You're a lifesaver, Teuchi-san," the pink-haired girl sighed, turning her back on her downed teammate to give the man a grateful smile. "Sakura-chan," Naruto said with delight, jumping up from his pile of rubble without seeming to notice he should have at least 3 fractured ribs and a concussion. "You have a regular at Ichiraku's now?" That was just about the best news Naruto had ever heard. He had almost given up teaching Sakura the wonder that was ramen before he left. She turned back towards him before yawning. "Yeah, I kind of needed to. Between my duties as one of the head medics at the hospital, my missions as a Junin, and my Genin team, I need all the energy I could get." Naruto squinted his eyes in confusion for a second but then nodded along happily. After all, ramen was a wonderful source of energy. He ate at Ichiraku at least once a day when he was able to, and he was known as the most hyperactive ninja alive. Where did people think he got all that energy? "Here you go," Teuchi said as he placed a foam cup on the counter. Sakura smiled and exchanged her money for the beverage with evident relief. "Thanks." Naruto, meanwhile, was having something of an existential crisis. Is that coffee, Sakura-chan?" "What?" the medic asked after taking a long pull. She cocked her head to the side and then rolled her eyes. "Duh, I said I needed energy. But, where's your ramen? I'm not getting any." The expression on Naruto's face at that moment could only be described as disgusted horror. "I don't even know you anymore, Sakura-chan." Sakura's face snapped into a scowl. "Don't make me punch you again. Sensei is so embarrassing when she's like this," a girl's voice complained weakly from behind them. "Are you kidding?" came the delighted response. "Sensei's awesome when she's kicking ass." The third teammate, a tall boy with a long, narrow face and distinctive eyes, only grunted. But his feelings were clear enough from the smirk on his face. Naruto stopped cowering long enough to glance back and blink at the 3 genin, 2 Inuzuka and a Hyuga if the facial markings and eyes were anything to go by, who were lurking at the edge of the stand. The blonde turned back to face his teammate and asked, "When did you get a genin team? You didn't even listen when I told you I had them, did you?" Correctly interpreting Naruto's silence as a yes, the medic propped her hand on her hip and rolled her eyes. "6 months after you did," she answered. "They're great kids, but truthfully I just don't have time to train them. Usually being a leading medic in the hospital is a full-time job in and of itself, and I was already pulling Junin missions on top of that. I'm sure I'm sleep-deprived, and I'm afraid I take it out on them sometimes." Naruto turned to glance at the kids, who shrugged in response. The girl, one of the 2 Inuzuka, answered, "It's not that bad. I mean, it was kind of scary at first when Sakura-sensei threw boulders at us, but at least it's a good workout. And avoiding sensei's punches adds a lot of motivation to agility training." Naruto's jaw dropped in horror. He was okay when Sakura decked him, but genin? Normal genin? How were they all still standing and seemingly unmaimed? "Hey, I do the best I can," Sakura said defensively in response to his expression. "They're all improving well for the amount of time I can give them, and they work hard on their own." Besides, she muttered, I wasn't even supposed to have them in the first place. What? Naruto blinked. What does that mean? Well, flashback. Team 7 had something of an odd relationship, most likely because of their exceedingly odd history. Not because of Sasuke's defection, sad as it was all too common for a team member to defect and become an enemy. No, Team 7 was odd because Sasuke came back. Tranquilized like a prized, pet jungle cat, yes. But he still came back. Not that he really had much of a choice. After the injury, he couldn't live on his own at first, and his options had been limited. Jugo had died in battle. Suigetsu could barely care for himself, let alone someone as high maintenance as Sasuke, and Karen. Well, Naruto got to Karen. And then they found out she was, shudder, related to the Dobi, and all hope for her was lost. The two had spent a week after the big reveal nearly attached at the hip and, the horror, bonding. And no, Sasuke wasn't jealous that Naruto had family after all. Or that Karen did. Okay, so maybe normally he would be, just a little. But in this case the people in question found out they were related to either Naruto or Karen. As far as Sasuke was concerned, that was dodging a kunai. But what was Sasuke supposed to do? After he learned the truth, not what Konoha had done but that Tobi was the reason Itachi had been unable to refuse, Sasuke wasn't about to let the bastard win. And if he had to team up with Naruto again and see his ecstatic smile and hear him blather on about how they were a team again and he had never lost faith in Sasuke, well, so be it. Then, of course, Tobi had ripped his eyes out of their sockets. That had kind of put a damper on things. But in the great tradition of their team line's history, the Dobi donated an eye to the bastard genius with the Kunoichi medic Nin to assist. Naruto hadn't been dying and was a Jinchuriki and an Uzumaki to boot, so his eye had grown back within 2 hours, but it totally still counted. Yeah, sometimes Sasuke worried about his team. And sometimes when Sasuke's newly feebled grasp of depth perception had led him to walk into yet another wall, he was tempted to ask Naruto for another eye. Seriously, Naruto was like a free organ factory when you thought about it. But Sasuke knew that Naruto would agree without hesitation, which, against all logic, made him feel too guilty to ask. Plus, Sakura might have discreetly threatened to strangle him with his own entrails if he did. That may have influenced his decision slightly. Hard to say. Besides, being one-eyed made Sasuke seem more like Kakashi than Orochimaru to the general population, which was decidedly in his favor if he planned to survive in Konoha. And then there was the fact that, knowing the Dobi, Naruto would insist on giving Sasuke his left eye. Again, and then Sasuke would be forced to spend the rest of his life with 2 left eyes. Sasuke was far too obsessive-compulsive to handle that, so he quietly let that dream die. He had enough in his life to irate him, he didn't have to add to the problem. Like Tsunade. How he hated Tsunade and all of her kind. Tsunade, for her part, was using much more effort than should have been necessary to keep from growling. Or lunging forward and biting the last Uchiha's head right off his scrawny neck. What do you mean you failed the genin team you were assigned? Sasuke huffed and crossed his arms in front of his chest. That should be pretty obvious. It means I failed them. I sent them back to the academy. I'm not taking the little monsters. It really wasn't worth the effort not to clobber him, the Godem thought. It really wasn't. I got that part. What I don't understand is how you can justify that when you just told me that they figured out the objective of the test and worked together. The Uchiha shrugged. Tsunade gritted her teeth and tried to refrain from strangling the brat, for Sakura and Naruto's sakes. The dark-haired Nin gave a long-suffering sigh. We both know you only gave me that genin team so they could serve as spies and report my activities back to you. There's no way you'd actually trust me with a team. Stop being paranoid, Uchiha, Tsunade snorted aloud. Internally her thoughts were closer to, damn, he's onto us. All the same, I won't be taking on your little brats. I might have given up burning this place to the ground, but I'm not exactly thrilled to be giving you my techniques either. He didn't mention that without his Sharingan he couldn't perform most of them anyway. Tsunade gritted her teeth. She had been convinced that this plan would work out. If it didn't, it was one more thing she would have to deal with, and she now had 3 clan children she would have to place suddenly on top of it. Fed up, she shot a glower at the oblivious teen and shouted, Sakura. Come here and clean up after your teammate. What did Sai do now? The pink-haired medic called, voice exhausted, From the file room in the back of the office. Besides paint 6 foot tall, male genitalia on public monuments again, nothing. Then Kakashi? He was 3 hours late to a meeting with the daimyo and almost got Konoha's funding cut, but wrong one. Yamato? Sakura sounded incredulous. But he's normally so good. He spent the last 3 days trying to teach the forest to waltz again and ended up in the hospital when he got trampled and made more work for me, but besides that he's good. Oh come on, Naruto's not even in the country. It was Sasuke, Sakura. There was a long minute of silence. Isn't he still in prison? Tsunade paused as her and the last Uchiha's single eye met for a second. Sasuke had been out of confinement for almost 3 months. You had tea with him last week, the Hokage reminded. I've had tea? At that moment, eyes still locked in a standoff, Tsunade and Sasuke's thoughts might have been described as inverse reflections of each other. Sasuke's thoughts were something like this. Everyone knew that the pink-haired girl was working herself to the bone to hold the hospital together on top of taking missions. There was no way that Tsunade would actually give her any more work. Not only was it inefficient and cruel, this was Sakura they were talking about. Tsunade's apprentice. That meant the woman knew her well enough to know that if the pressure kept up, Sakura would snap like a twig and make Itachi's slaughter of the Uchiha clan look like a faux pas on par with using the wrong silverware at a dinner party. Tsunade, meanwhile, was thinking that maybe her apprentice really was overworked, what with putting in up to 15 hours a day at the hospital, maintaining her training, taking semi-regular missions, and acting as an aide for the Hokage on top of all that. But on the other hand, if she didn't pass the buck on to Sakura, then Tsunade would have to deal with it. Nah, Sakura could take it. Get in here, Sakura. In front of her desk, Sasuke crossed his arms over his chest and refused to be moved. It was a bluff. It had to be. Guess what, Sakura? The Hokage said happily as the exhausted girl entered the main office. You get to take this brat's genin team because he refuses to take the responsibility. Sasuke had a single instant to stare into Sakura's blazing green eyes before he realized he had always been right about Konoha. This place really was made of pure evil. End flashback. So anyway, that's how I got my little band of gophers, Sakura finished explaining with a careless shrug. You call them gophers? Naruto said, beaming, as he zeroed in on the most important part of the information he'd just been given. That's so cool, just like I have my duckies. Sakura cocked her head in confusion and studied her teammate as though he may have acquired further brain damage while she wasn't looking. Naruto blinked, smiled dimming. What? He glanced back at the kids and repeated, what? The Inuzuka boy explained, it's not gophers, it's gophers. Naruto's eyes narrowed in suspicion. It's not so much a nickname as it is a description, the girl piped up helpfully. Before Naruto could inquire any further, Sakura cut in. Anyway, now that you're back I need a favor. The blonde perked back up. Sure, Sakura-chan, what do you need? Take my kids for a while. Naruto blinked. Am I even allowed to do that? He asked, remembering Tsunade's odd disapproval of the way he treated his own team. He shook his head. Besides, I don't think my duckies will like it very much. I don't care. Sakura snarled, eyes wild, as her patience, red, sanity, gave way with a nearly audible snap. I haven't slept in the past 4 days. I'm surviving off coffee and vending machine donuts, and this is the first time my genin have seen the sun in the last week and a half. I love them, but I can't deal with their incessant questions right now because it's only going to get worse. The annual Junin medical evaluations are coming, which normally creates enough extra work, but this year I've been informed that I'll be held personally responsible for getting Kakashi-sensei to his appointment on time, which means I'll have to chase him down and drag him in by the ear. The hospital has just started a mass transition of documentation going back 5 years, so I'll have to redo paperwork for every patient I've ever had. I'm up for recertification in a week and have to take a written exam, and on top of all that the Hokage, in all her wisdom, has seen fit to leave me in charge of running the Chunin exams, which are next month in case you didn't know. By the time she was finished, Sakura was panting for breath, cheeks red and eyes wild. So, Naruto hazarded through squinting eyes, you've been kinda busy? Sakura's hand snaked out, grabbed the hapless blonde by the throat, and pulled him in so that he dangled by his collar. And then she hissed at him. And that was how Naruto found himself leading 3 new genin to his team's designated meeting point. He wasn't really sure how to go about teaching them, especially all together, but he figured he could work something out. Probably. Or the gophers and his duckies would have lots of fun playing together, and he'd just have to worry about extinguishing the flaming corpses later. Whichever. At least Kurama would have fun. Nothing was on fire yet, Naruto was proud to report. There had been a few mid-sized explosions, but then, you had to expect that when a shinobi's routine was disturbed. And Kurama had apparently found the whole thing tedious enough to run off, so that was something. The Biju tended to have a sixth sense for the really good mayhem and always made a point to stick around when it was nearing, so everything would probably be fine. As long as Naruto didn't decide to kill something. Or someone. I want them to leave. Naruto's cute, little, purple-haired student screeched, stomping one sandal-clad foot. Yeah, Naruto-sensei is ours. Takeshi agreed, suspicious eyes trained on the newcomers. Nearing 5 minutes into the same rant, Naruto closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and reminded himself, for the 6th time, that he deserved this for what he and his own genin team had put Kakashi-sensei through. I don't know you guys. Kosada said, changing the course of the argument at last. Naruto's shortest student had kept quiet until now. When the blonde Junin's head snapped up, it was to find the boy shuffling his feet shyly. I mean, Naruto-sensei just wants to help his friend by taking them for a while. It won't be so bad. Kosada's two teammates turned disbelieving stares on him. But Kosada wasn't paying attention to them. Instead, he was blushing and waving shyly at Kaoru, who was waving happily back with a wide grin. Takeshi's eye twitched. Megumi crossed her arms over her chest and huffed. Traitor. Naruto was barely able to stop himself from reaching out and squeezing the kid to within an inch of his life. A break in the madness. Finally, time to get this show on the road. Everybody sit your cute little butts down, Naruto said as he plopped to the ground, forcing himself back into a good mood through will and long practice alone. Why are you talking about my cute little butt? Yahiko demanded, eyes laughing. But Takeshi didn't appreciate the joke. Shut it, he said as he reached out and smacked the back of the Inuzuka's head as he passed by to claim the free spot next to his sensei for himself. Hey, Yahiko growled, his puppy, Sabama, adding her own discontented barks at his ankles. Hey, none of that. Naruto waved his hands at the boys placatingly. You'll get to beat each other bloody in a few minutes. This is group discussion time. Hajime crossed his arms over his chest and stared at the duckies disapprovingly. You have no discipline at all. Like you have any room to talk. Megumi sniped from where she had snuggled herself up to the Junin's side in a blatant show of ownership. Back me up here, Kosada. In an ironic show that neither team had room to talk, Kosada and Kaoru were sitting off by themselves, giggling. Kosahiro, Kaoru's black puppy, was laying tummy up on Kosada's lap and being lavished with attention. Traitors. Kosada, startled at his teammate's snarl, nearly threw the small dog from his lap as he turned to face the other genin. Did you say something, Megumi-chan? She said join the huddle, short stuff, Naruto called with a grin. Kosada always was the friendliest of his duckies. It was good to see at least one of his kids being nice. Naruto's face screwed up into a frown. It still didn't explain why Megumi and Takeshi were acting so aggressive. But then, Sakura's boys weren't making things easy either. Once all the genin had made their way into the circle, Naruto put his hands on his knees and smiled at the group. I think we got off to a little bit of a shaky start, but that's okay. You guys weren't in the same class at the academy, right? There were shaken heads all around. That's what I thought. Yeah, Yahiko agreed before peering suspiciously at Kosada and his cousin, or, more to the point, the lack of space between them. How do you two know each other again? We met at the park a few years ago, Kosada explained with a grin. Kaoru hit him in the arm. Don't just put it like that. She turned back to her cousin. He saved Kosahiro when he got stuck up a tree. There was a long silence around the circle. Finally, Megumi asked the obvious question. Why was your puppy up a tree? Kaoru's face took on a defensive cast as she drew her puppy to her chest. Why wouldn't he be in a tree? The duckies shared a look. But, how does that? Hijimi sighed as Yahiko, voice exasperated, explained, Kosahiro wants to be a cat. It's a perfectly valid life choice. Kaoru snapped, glaring at her cousin. Naruto, who had always appreciated the oddballs of the world, looked at the puppy with new respect. Well, I've always been a cat person myself, the blonde remarked in support. This sparked a round of incredulous laughter from his team. Naruto blinked. What? What's funny? Flashback. It started one day when, disconcertingly enough, Kurama wandered up to Naruto, dropped a severed arm at his feet, and then stared up at him with his tails all a wag. This behavior would always be a bit troubling, but at the moment it was especially problematic because Naruto was in the middle of a quaint little picnic with his duckies, and he thought the ragged strips of bloody flesh clinging to the end of the ulna might upset their stomachs. Naruto yelped in surprise and disgust and took several big steps backwards. What's that? The fox glanced down at the severed limb and then back up at his Jinchuriki. It is an arm, Kurama explained slowly. I know that, Naruto snapped. I mean, why is it? Whose arm is it? Ah, Kurama said with new understanding. It was a fair question. It belongs to the missing nin that attempted to assault your kits this morning. But, Naruto pointed out, he ran as soon as he saw me. And he didn't actually hurt them at all. We could have taken him all by ourselves. Takeshi said around a mouthful of onigiri. Be that as it may, the fox said primly, he attacked. There was a long silence as Naruto tried to understand how one thing related to another, and then he took a moment to feel bad for the poor sucker who had apparently upset Kurama. Well? Kurama prompted after several long minutes. Naruto's eyes shifted back and forth, before settling on the biju again. Well, what? Aren't you going to take it? The blonde Junin's mouth dropped open, but he couldn't seem to think of anything to say in response. Giving it up for a bad job, he leapt to his feet, grabbed Kosada under one arm, Megumi under the other, and kicked at Takeshi to get him moving. That's it, lunch is over, evacuation order beta. But, Naruto shook his head and muttered out of the corner of his mouth, Kurama is having one of those days. Left behind by the quickly retreating Junin and his team, Kurama narrowed his eyes in bemusement. That hadn't gone quite according to plan. As was the case for most events that would be scaring to a normal team, the incident was all but forgotten until 3 days later. Which was when Kurama showed up to the field Team 7 had taken to using as a training area, dragging a torso, sans limbs or head. This time all 4 members of the team stopped what they were doing to gape at the spectacle. Well, 3 of them stopped and Megumi stopped after Kosada failed to move out of the way of the piledriver she had sent his way. I have brought you a better gift, Kurama announced proudly into the horrified silence. Naruto answered. He looked to his genin for help but Takeshi just shrugged, Kosada looked nauseous, and Megumi looked mildly fascinated. Naruto turned his face away from that disaster in the making and settled in to repress the memory. And repressing in 3, 2, 1. He turned back to the fox. Why? Kurama cocked his head to the side. Why what? Why the torso? The fox's nose wrinkled at having to explain the obvious. To eat, of course. Naruto said. Blinked. Another thing to repress. Busy day today. Kurama climbed to his feet unhappily as he realized something. You refuse to feast upon the flesh of your enemies? The fox asked with, he felt, understandable confusion. Yeah? Naruto hedged awkwardly. I don't really do that. Kurama looked from Naruto's face to the corpse he had dropped at his feet, to Naruto again. Finally, he nudged the body toward the teenager invitingly. It is good for you. It will allow his strength to become your own. Yeah, I'm okay, the blonde assured with a forced grin. Kurama continued to stare into Naruto's face, unblinking. The blonde sighed and ran a hand through his hair. It was usually better to just give in to Kurama's whims when he got like this, but yeah, not happening this time. If you really want me to eat something you catch, he compromised, you could get me a fish or something. Kurama's eyes narrowed and he peered into Naruto's face for a long second before nodding to himself. I will catch you a moose. And with that he left, a demon on a mission. A what? Naruto yelped, hand outstretched after the Biju's swiftly retreating back as the red streak disappeared into the surrounding grass. After a moment Naruto turned back to his students with a dejected sigh and informed them, he's catching me a moose. Takashi rolled his eyes. You should have just accepted the arm, Naruto-sensei. Naruto blinked big, confused eyes at his student. What? The boy sighed. You've never had a cat, huh? When his teacher just stared at him blankly, he explained, cats bring the people they like presents. Presents? Naruto asked, eyes screwing up in confusion. Like poop? No, Takeshi said, with more patience than his teacher really deserved. That's rats. Cats give you things they killed so that you can eat them. Or possibly play with them, cuss cats are weird. Little murderous psychopaths, Megumi said approvingly. Naruto shook his head. That still doesn't explain why I should have accepted an arm instead of spritzing his face. Because if you don't take it, they figure it's because you don't like it. But I didn't like it. Naruto yelped. So, the genin continued as though he hadn't been interrupted, they get you something better. Like a torso. Or a moose, apparently. Quote. Naruto's mouth opened to respond, before slowly closing again. Then he shook his head and demanded, but how does any of that even apply to Kurama? He's a fox, not a cat. Takeshi met his teacher's eyes for a long second before turning to stare in the direction Kurama had run, then pointedly down to the cadaver at their feet. Naruto looked down as well. The missing nin didn't even look injured. No blood or wounds anywhere except at the stumps, almost as if he'd just been batted around until he dropped. Naruto thought about this for a minute, and then slumped unhappily. Oh, so, Megumi interrupted, if you're not gonna eat that, can I have it? There was a long, uncomfortable silence as this statement sunk into her teammates' heads. Takeshi took a large, unsubtle step backwards. Then Kosada broke the awkward moment by laughing in sudden relief. Oh, you mean to use as an anatomically accurate target for your senbon? Megumi blinked once, slowly. Yeah, that's what I meant. End flashback. Naruto huffed indignantly. Yeah, that's what I said. I'm a cat person. Naruto-sensei, Megumi said gently with a hand on his arm. You have no idea how to deal with Kurama when he gets like that. And all of a sudden, the Gophers weren't really sure they wanted to be in the same prefecture as the Duckies and their very worrisome sensei. Except for Kaoru, who was willing to risk it for reasons that will go unremarked upon. Naruto huffed before clapping decisively. That's it everybody. Just break up into pairs and get ready to show each other what you've got. Naruto blinked. Then he bit his lip, cocked his head to the side, got briefly distracted by a passing butterfly, then refocused and blinked again. I don't really know what I'm seeing here, he admitted to himself. Stand still so I can murder you. Okay, Yahiko chirped, his forward rush screeching to a stop. Then pivoted just enough to avoid Takeshi's fist as the other boy went sailing past, momentum unchecked. Oh, maybe next time. Arg, I mean, Naruto muttered slowly, it kinda looks like sparring, but I mean. He stared helplessly at the three pairs of fighting genin. It was more like, okay. So it seemed like Sakura-chan had barely trained her team at all. Why won't you just die? In attacking, dodging on the other hand, the Gophers had down to an art form. His Duckies had yet to land a single hit, as far as he had seen. The Gophers had landed plenty. Of course, that didn't really matter when, as far as he could tell, they also hadn't inflicted any damage. At all. Kaoru had hit Kosada straight in the face and the short boy hadn't so much as paused to rub it before trying, and failing, to land a roundhouse kick to the girl's ribs. His team was made of powerhouses. If they could land just one hit, any one of them would crush their opponent like a fly. But they weren't hitting. It was like trying to punch the wind. Naruto considered this. Maybe if they set their farts on fire. He wondered to himself, tapping his chin. Hijimi pulled up short to stare at the Junin, and only just ducked out of the way of Megumi's incoming senbon. Switch partners. He called out automatically as his preset timer sounded. He focused back on his thoughts as his kids grudgingly switched sparring partners. Naruto was pretty sure his kids would win eventually. Not only did they have more experience, but the Gophers would have to slow down eventually while the Duckies, used to playing fetch with a very demanding Biju, could power on for days if they had to. But then, Sakura's team had only been genin for half as long as his own team had. Naruto snapped to attention as an unearthly screech split the air, ready to protect his kids from whatever the threat was, but... Well, he thought with dull resignation, at least he knew what this was. Two of his genin were pulling each other's hair and clawing at each other's eyes. Like rabid cats, they weren't even taking advantage of the obvious openings in their opponent's guard. That shit could just not stand. He marched over and grabbed the two by the backs of their necks and yanked them apart. He glared from one enraged face to the other, before huffing and demanding, Kaoru-chan. What happened here? On the sidelines, Kaoru flinched and glanced guiltily between the two dangling boys. Hijimi somehow managed to look as haughty and unruffled as ever, but while Kosada was trying he just looked like an enraged ball of hair and weaponry. Naruto turned a surprisingly effective glare on the girl. She squeaked and hurried to explain. Well, Hijimi and Kosada paired up and then. 10 minutes previous. You have a sword? Kosada asked, wonder and no small amount of envy in his voice as the other boy summoned the weapon from a scroll. Hijimi smirked. Of course. Sakura-sensei gave it to me the second week of training after I made it clear I was ready for the responsibility. A condescending pause. Hasn't your sensei let you try your hand at one? Kosada scowled. No, Naruto-sensei had not. Flashback within a flashback. It had been 3 months since his team had passed the genin test. 3 months. Kosada had been telling sensei since day one that he wanted to learn to use a sword, but every time he so much as hinted at getting one of his own something came up. It was always, not now, it's lunchtime, or, Kurama really needs a bath, or, the bushes are suspiciously on fire and we should really check that out so maybe we can talk about this later, okay bye. But this time, Naruto-sensei was going to listen to him. Naruto-sensei, please, I really want a sword. My mother is known for using one, and all of my sisters, and just. I had to be able to use one. He cast about desperately for something to add to his cause. It's my ninja way. That's what Naruto-sensei was always going on about, right? So he had to listen. Naruto frowned down at his shortest student in consternation. Kosada had invoked the power of the ninja way. Low blow, that. Or, the blonde considered as he stared down at the earnest little face. Maybe he was just really serious about it. And if it was that important to him then, maybe he should let the kid try it. It was just. Sasuke had a sword. Sasuke had a sword, and did he really want any of his cute little duckies, especially Kosada, the littlest of the bunch, to copy the bastard? Naruto's frown deepened. No, he did not. Besides, only snobs used swords, everybody knew that. Well, snobs and Anbu. But Anbu taught their recruits how to use them in basic training, and you didn't want to be the loser who went in already knowing how to use one. Or the suck up, or something. And Kosada didn't want to be Anbu anyway, so it didn't matter. What mattered was that Naruto refused to turn Kosada into a mini Sasuke. He should totally be a mini Naruto instead. If Sasuke wanted mini-s he'd just have to get a team himself. But then, Naruto thought as a proud grin stole over his face, his duckies were the most awesome genin around. Naruto paused as this thought bumped around his head. His duckies were the most awesome genin. Sasuke always tried to be the best, and know the best moves, and have the best, most legendary weapons, and, now that Naruto thought about it, he'd probably want the best students too. Naruto's eyes widened as it all finally clicked into place in his head. Kosada didn't want a sword, that was stupid. Kosada was way too cool to want a puny sword as his primary weapon. No, Sasuke wanted Kosada to want a sword. Damn genjutsu-driven conspiracies. Yeah, no way. The duckies were property of Uzumaki Naruto. Sasuke, wherever he was obviously hiding out lurking like a pervert, was just going to have to step off. But how to go about simultaneously telling Sasuke that he was onto him and that Naruto wasn't going to take this laying down? A feral grin stole over the blonde Junin's face. He was just gonna have to show the Teme that these kids were already taken. He would just tell them it was for stealth training or something. Still standing in front of his teacher, his anger long since replaced with apprehension, Kosada shifted uneasily. And Naruto-sensei? I'm sorry that I, End flashback within a flashback. Kosada blinked out of the memory with a shudder. Orange. Megumi still hadn't forgiven him for that one. He suspected Takeshi hadn't either. And that was the last time he had had the courage to ask Naruto-sensei about a sword. If that was the kind of cruel and unusual punishment it would bring down on him and his teammates. Yeah, sensei might have said it was for stealth training, but they all knew that was a dirty lie. So the only way Kosada was ever getting a sword was if he got one on his own. Unfortunately, Konoha tradition dictated that a genin's first sword had to be a gift from a mentor or claimed in battle. Even more unfortunately, tradition also dictated that the highest-ranked shinobi involved in the fight got first dibs on loot. And 3 guesses as to what Naruto-sensei always snapped up first. So no swords that way. Unless... Kosada blinked and focused on the weapon in his opponent's hands. If Kosada wasn't wrong, and he wasn't, that was a Dodonuki blade. Good steel, nice heft. Sword that cuts through torsos. Basically, it was a really nice sword. Huh. Kosada considered that for a long moment, then screeched and lunged for his sparring partner's jugular. Present. Kaoru shrugged. And, that's it. She was actually a little worried about Kosada. That kind of behavior was kinda like Sakura-sensei right before she started throwing the big boulders. Naruto let out a world-weary sigh. Now even Kosada, the good one, was acting up. Fed up with the genin bickering and their absolute refusal to work as a team, he dropped the two, still glaring, boys and resorted to his old standby. His favorite instrument of threat and terror. Mr. Squirts. As one, the duckies scrambled into a defensive huddle, trying to ready themselves for the inevitable when. I'm not a bad dog. Yahiko howled desperately as he cowered against his cousin. Kaoru clapped her arms over her head and whimpered. Meanwhile, the pair's puppies had done the smart thing and hightailed it up a nearby tree. No one questioned how Sabama got up there. There was a long silence as the duckies froze, staring at the other genin in shock. These intruders understood the horror that was Mr. Squirts? In their long, tortured experience, no one understood the horror that was Mr. Squirts. Swallowing his fear in a truly heroic display of bravery, Takeshi snuck past his bemused sensei to approach the Inuzuka pair and stick out a hand. He glanced at Naruto with a gulp and then bulldozed on, "We were wrong about you. Welcome to the team. You have got to be kidding me," Hijimi muttered to himself, face disgusted. Takeshi turned to appraise the other genin, unimpressed. "You I don't like." Naruto watched the genin before nodding in satisfaction. This he could work with. Several hours later found Naruto stretched out languidly on a tree branch and basking in the sweet sounds of his kids setting things on fire down below. As a team, yeah, he was an awesome sensei. They have not yet killed and eaten any of the newcomers, Kurama remarked with interest. Naruto didn't even flinch, used to the fox's tendency to appear out of nowhere. He did frown in the Biju's direction though. "Kurama, we've been over this. Humans don't. Believe whatever you wish," the fox said magnanimously, "but as they are still breathing, I assume they have been allowed to join the skulk?" Kurama rolled his eyes. "The family. Oh, yep, I guess you could say that," Naruto said happily. Then he blinked as he noticed the body that the fox had dragged up the tree. "And that is?" Kurama glanced down. "Lunch." The blonde shrugged. The dead bird was scrawnier than Kurama tended to drag back, but what the heck? He was getting hungry anyway. "Cool. Thanks, buddy." He reached out and scratched the fox behind the ears. Takeshi was saying he was in the mood for chicken. "No, that's for you," Kurama snapped before relaxing back into his comfortable sprawl. "I'll catch the kids something nutritious later." Naruto shrugged and accepted that easily enough. There wasn't exactly much meat on the thing. So the blonde picked up the bird, threw it over his shoulder, and wandered off to find a fire pit. Though if he knew why Kurama thought the scrawny, singed, bald carcass was an appropriate gift for his very favorite human, Naruto would have dropped it and fled the country. And he might have even remembered to grab the duckies on his way out if they were very, very lucky. One hopes. Unfortunately, knowing Naruto, he might have just shrugged and decided he was too hungry to let good meat go to waste. Either way, that was the beginning of the end. End of lunch. Somewhere along the way, Tsunade thought with a deep sense of resignation, she must have really offended some deity or another. There wasn't any other explanation. To come so close and have it end up like this. She could very nearly see retirement drifting tauntingly past her fingertips. She was supposed to be out from under her grandfather's horrible hat within 6 months of the brat coming back. That was the plan. That was the deal. And yes, his quirky teaching style had worried some people, his release of the Kyuubi had horrified others. But they had swept that under the rug fast enough and Naruto was popular enough for that to see them through. But this, Iron Country, Tsunade reiterated disbelievingly, is declaring war. I said on the brink of declaring war, Koharu snapped. But, Iron Country, the blonde repeated dully, the land of neutrality. The bastion of peace. That Iron Country? Yes, well, they got involved in the Great Shinobi World War, didn't they? Gave them ideas if you ask me. They've gotten uppity, Koharu muttered with the determined petulance of old warmongers the world over. And who can blame them? Homura demanded. I certainly can't given the circumstances. Tsunade put her head in her hands and sighed. And we're sure it's Naruto's fault. It wasn't a question. She wished it was, but it really wasn't. Because the Kyuubi was Naruto's responsibility, and the Kyuubi was definitely at fault. And everyone knew it. It was kind of hard to argue uninvolvement when half of the Iron Country royal court and who knew how many members of the royal guard had watched the nation's revered guardian spirit, out for a daily flight about the Grand Temple's courtyard, get grabbed out of the clear, blue sky by the suddenly present jaws of a 300-foot-tall monster fox. Not that the rat bastard had made matters any better by proceeding to shrink down to the size of a wolf, wink at the gathered nobles, and trot off with the thing's corpse dangling from his mouth. Usually even that wouldn't be so bad. Little things like a broken neck and bite wounds to the jugular weren't too big of a deal to a phoenix. No, had the world been a fair place, Fire Country could have apologized humbly and returned the rumpled but no worse for wear bird to its contingent of diligent worshippers with only a minor political kerfuffle. Instead, Naruto had eaten the blasted thing. You had to ask yourself, how was that even a thing that happened? How? The damned boy had eaten a phoenix. This seemed more like a badly thought-out prank than reality. But it had happened. And now Iron Country was demanding reparations, primarily in the form of Naruto's head on a pike. Tsunade gave a heavy sigh and put her head in her hands, whatever way you look at it. Naruto just proved he's not ready to be Hokage. Her forehead clunked down on the table. The ass. Outside the window, the two Anbu guards turned and blinked at each other through the eyeholes of their masks. Kosada trudged home after a long practice session. His team and the Gophers, as Naruto-sensei refused to stop calling them, had worked together excellently, except for Hajime. Man, he hated that guy. Normally Kosada liked to think of himself as an even-tempered kind of guy, but that jerk's face just made Kosada want to start punching him and never stop. Wow, what's got you all worked up, Kosada-chan? Kosada looked up to see his oldest sister, tall and beautiful and dressed in her flak jacket with her sword strapped to her back, starting out the front door of their house. He slumped. If any of his other sisters called him that, he'd make a fuss, but with Yoshiko it wasn't even worth it. Nothing. She gave him a measuring look but seemed to decide she was in too much of a rush to pursue the line of questioning at the moment. Alright, but we'll talk about this later, little guy. Hey, little guy was going just a little too far. The young woman ruffled his hair. Start dinner, okay? The rest of us have to go take care of something. Kosada frowned. All of you? It's kinda weird that everyone has a mission at once, isn't it? It's not a mission, exactly. More of a, never mind. Don't worry about it. Just go on in the house, get dinner started, and stay inside until we get back, okay? What? The boy started, alarmed. What's going on? Don't worry about it, baby, his mother soothed as she joined Yoshiko in the doorway. She was a tall, shapely woman, and though signs of her advancing age were visible in the wrinkles around her eyes, she was still more than simply lovely, and remarkably unthreatening, but then, that's how she liked it. It's nothing dangerous. A bit of a situation has come up, is all, and the Junin have to go in. Fix everything before anyone else even notices, Kosada finished with a reluctant grin. Got it in one, his mother winked. Listen to your sister, and don't worry. We should be home before too late. And we'll be hungry, so make lots of oden. Masao, his second youngest sister and a glowing 17, demanded as she joined the others. The boy huffed. I'm making curry tonight. You always make curry, Sahori complained as she stomped out, securing a few extra scrolls as she went. Then you should know to expect it, Kosada said haughtily. Why you? That's enough, the oldest Kunoichi cut in. We're late as it is. She gave Kosada a peck on the cheek and then started on her way, calling over her shoulder, girls. Get out here. The three young women that were already out of the house quickly followed their mother, but Kosada stayed well back from the front door. And true to expectation, a few seconds later his other four sisters came pelting out the door, jostling for position as they pushed their way forward. And yet, Kosada thought with his normal mix of admiration and deep confusion, all their hair remained perfectly in place and their swords unmolested. Here it might be interesting to note that Kosada's 7 sisters looked nothing alike. Hair in black, brown, blonde, bright red, even blue, purple and green. Eyes of every shade. Different jawlines and brows and lips and noses. They only had 2 things in common. They were all tall, and they all had a sword. Yeah, well, Kosada didn't think it was funny. His classmates used to think it was strange that his family looked so different, but that's what happened when, well, Kosada's mom had had a special kind of job. The way it had been explained to him as a small child was that his mother was so powerful, and sneaky, and beautiful, very important, that last one, that she had been selected for one of Konoha's most important programs. She was to risk her life for her village by going out into the world and making contact with the most powerful and influential foreign shinobi she could find. It had taken him a few more years to understand exactly what kind of contact they meant. To put it simply, his mother's children were all the offspring of different infamous shinobi from across the world, bred for genetic superiority, power, and the hope of gathering foreign bloodline secrets for Konoha. Except for Kosada. No, his father had been some gate guard his mom had gotten drunk with when she was off duty. And it was kinda depressing how much it showed. With a sigh, Kosada shuffled into the house and locked the door behind him. The funny thing about living in a ninja village was that, well, that it was a ninja village mostly. That basically meant what you'd expect, but there were a few subtleties that didn't seem to occur to outsiders. Like that basic medical supplies were half the price of what they were in the nearest civilian town, but most suites were almost double. Or that students caught cheating on school tests were given stern lectures on their messy technique. Or the fact that shinobi going on strike was considered dereliction of duty and high treason and was an executable offense. Yeah, civilians never seemed to think about stuff like that. As it was, the shinobi inhabitants of the village had to be a little bit clever in their ways of getting their point across. If you could call it clever, anyway. Creatives certainly fit the bill. Over in Sector 54, Anbu Agent Monkey was certainly not thinking about this. No, he was having some problems of his own. Namely, his mask was attempting to eat his face. Really, he felt it was important that he share this information with his squad, and, like the professional he was, did so in as succinct a manner as possible. Mainly by screeching, "It's eating my face," and clawing at the obviously possessed porcelain clinging to his head while running in increasingly panicked circles. Raccoon, Monkey's field captain, would normally have thought of such behavior as a transparent ploy to get out of guard duty at worst or a laughable inability to throw off a genjutsu at best, which was still pretty damn bad for an Anbu member. However, Raccoon had been in the field long enough to know what was what. And that mask was definitely trying to eat that man's face. Really. As such, he had no choice but to call in backup. Like the entirety of the Anbu Corps not already on active assignment outside the village backup. Which is why no one was available to act as crowd control in other areas of the village as chaos suddenly, and quite coincidentally, we assure you, erupted in the streets. Chaos like what was seen in the Hyuga district. It was quite a sight to see. Or not see, but we'll get to that later. Yes, it was really something, what with the respected members of the Hyuga clan wandering the streets and bewailing their fates loudly, and at length to the sky. Okay, so it wasn't actually that unusual. But normally they weren't walking face first into walls and tripping over their own feet as they did it. So tell me again, Sakura said soothingly into her clipboard, poised with her pen hovering above her report, what happened? Nothing happened. Hinata sniffled into a scrap of cloth that she seemed to think was her normal embroidered handkerchief. It didn't happen, we just realized. Realized what? The pink-haired girl encouraged in a commendably exasperation-free voice. That we're blind, Hinata wailed. At that, Sakura looked up from her clipboard to stare incredulously. Come again? I can't see. Well, yes, that's generally what blind means, Sakura acknowledged. It's just that normally when I think of the Hyuga, blind isn't what comes to mind. But Sakura-chan, Hinata explained patiently, we don't have pupils. How are we supposed to see without pupils? The medic Nin tapped her pen to her lip as she thought about that one. You know, I think you're right. You all must be blind. Just terrible, Hinata agreed into her handkerchief with a sob that one could, if they listened just right, be forgiven for mistaking for a giggle. And across the village, things were even worse. As in, civil war was about to break out between the Akamichi and the Nara clans worse. Outsiders might be surprised about this turn of events, but then outsiders were always surprised in ninja villages. That was kind of the whole point. But the clansmen, so carefully carefree in public, knew that tension and resentment had been building for years. Insults long unavenged in the name of peace still weren't forgotten. But this time it had gone too far. This time the Akamichi had eaten a Nara deer. The two clans stood opposite each other, arrayed for battle. It was admittedly a bit strange that they had decided to go to war in the Central Market District, but the general opinion was that Shikaku must have had some reason for it. Master strategists always did. Shikamaru was standing a dozen yards in front of his clan by his father's side and glared steadily at the two Akamichi approaching them. Choza and Choji, acting as the delegation from the other clan, stopped once they stood several yards away. "So it's finally come to this, has it?" Choza asked heavily, in an oddly loud voice. "You knew that it would," Shikaku announced grandly, "since the moment you and yours impinged on our honor and violated the sacred truce between us." "Dad," Shikamaru hissed, "don't you think you're overdoing it a little?" "Nonsense," the man whispered back, "I'm a pro at this. This kind of war is all about the show, son." He cleared his throat and turned back to the Akamichi. "Now will you apologize or will there be blood in the streets of Konoha?" Choza crossed his massive arms and thought. After a moment he nodded decisively and said, "I am truly sorry, that I only got a small one." An outraged gasp went through the ranks of the Nara. The big man leaned forward, as though imparting a secret, and continued, "It was delicious." Nearly purple with rage, Shikaku cried, "Attack!" But before the two sides were able to charge the field, an imperiously cleared throat froze them in their places. As one, the gathered clansmen and clan leaders turned to face the intruder. Kakashi, sharp-eyed and grim, had appeared between the two sides. He stared the clan delegations down until even the old soldiers were shifting uncomfortably. "You have something to add?" Shikaku asked suspiciously. "Now that Naruto has been judged ineligible for the title of Hokage, the elders have informed me that I will be inheriting the title." At this the clan heirs blinked and glanced at each other out of the corners of their eyes. "Because really?" And Kakashi continued in a severe tone, "As Konoha is soon to be under my command, I have news that takes precedent over whatever petty squabble you're fighting over now." There was a long, tension-filled pause. "From this day forward," the silver-haired nin announced, "all female shinobi will be required to wear tiny miniskirts." "Wah, that's all," Kakashi chirped before eyes smiling and clapping both men on the shoulders. "As you were." And with his normal panache for excellent timing, he poofed out just as a few dozen bladed projectiles, hurled by offended Kunoichi, struck the spot he had just vacated. Shikaku, Choza, and both of their sons stood in silence for several long moments. "They're making Kakashi Hokage?" Choza asked steadily. "Apparently. This can only end in tears." "Yep, at least Ino's already prepared." There was another long silence. "To the death." In a secure corner of a secure building, the Hokage, senior council, and assorted other high officials were holding a conference to deal with the situations that had cropped up. Tensions were somewhat high. So far the second in command of the eugenics department was going to have to be replaced due to head trauma, and the personal assistant to the chair of human resources, the department in charge of all mismanaged and imported organs and tissue samples, was having a quietly competent panic attack. Kaharu, bastion of efficiency that she was, had quickly grown tired of the younger shinobi and their prevaricating. She slammed a fist against the table, hissing, "There's no time for this. Other nations will invade if we continue to show such weakness." Meanwhile, elsewhere in the ninja world, a dozen or so foreign leaders were receiving frantic messages from their Konoha agents that could, as a general theme, be read as, "Danger levels in Konoha approaching Defcon 1. Advise strategic retreat and Class 4 fortification procedure." As a note for non-shinobi, in civilian terms this may be better read as, "The Konoha nin have lost it. They'll kill us all and eat what's left. Pull out, arm the gates, hide the academy students." "Calm down," Tsunade snapped. "We can contain this if we just act rationally." She took a deep breath and turned to her nervous student. "Now Sakura, what was it you wanted to say?" Well, the pink-haired girl who had been meekly sitting at the back of the room bit her lip. "I had to take a leave of absence." The room full of senior shinobi stared at the girl blankly for a long moment. Finally, when Tsunade regained feeling in her face, she stuttered, "What?" "A medical leave," the girl hurried to continue. "You see, with my schedule being what it is, and all the additional duties, and the last-minute missions, I haven't been able to have a regular sleep cycle for." "Sleep is for the weak, girl." Homura cut in. "You can't just grant yourself a medical leave at a time like this because you feel a bit tired." "Ah, no, that's not it," the girl stuttered. You see, it turns out I have an underlying, though mild, sleep disorder, and the prolonged disruption of my circadian rhythm has exacerbated my condition so that. Get to the point, Koharu snapped. And Sakura did, quite effectively, by taking that moment to gently lean to the side, and then toppled to the floor in a dead faint. A moment later she began to snore. I think, Tsunade said faintly, she's trying to tell us she's narcoleptic. They stared at the slumbering Kunoichi in a long, sober silence. Well, shit, muttered Koharu. In yet another part of the village, inside a prominent pub, a very different type of fight was about to break out. Now, before we continue any further, it may be interesting to note that this particular pub was known for three things. First, it was known for being a central hub of gossip within certain high-powered circles in Konoha, and therefore Fire Country in general. Second, it was known to be the favorite lunch spot of the Nato twins, the brother-sister pair that had served as secretaries to the senior council for more than 20 years. The two were something of celebrities in the clerical and intelligence-gathering departments of the village, dedicated and paranoid to the extreme. Rumor had it that the pair had a sprawling network of personal reconnaissance seals throughout the village. And third, and most important by far, it was renowned for its award-winning curry buns, made with a chewy mochi center. The snack was often described as to die for, and more than one person actually had. And that was how Karen, Ino, and Sasuke found themselves seated around a table in the center of the restaurant with a heaping pile of curry buns on a plate between them. The three had been contentedly gnawing away for some time, even Sasuke, who rarely had time for any carbon-based energy source that wasn't, in some sense, a tomato. After Sasuke had eaten his fill, he cleared his throat loudly and settled back in his seat. The two girls with him kept right on eating. Sasuke glared between the two for a few seconds in which nothing happened. Well, nothing caught fire. Sasuke was really concerned with the not on fire thing. Damn missing Sharingan. The young man took a deep breath, released it, and said loudly, "Stop eating." Neither girl heard him, or at least, they must not have heard him because they didn't listen or acknowledge him at all. And obviously Karen and Ino out of everyone on Earth would respond to him when he talked. Obviously. So they must have just not heard. Sasuke quietly set this burgeoning existential crisis aside and said louder, "I want you to help me have babies." Ino knocked her water over into a nearby patron's lap, although whether this was from shock or from being hit in the face when Karen sprayed bits of her own curry bun onto the blonde's face was unclear. "What?" Ino shrieked, catching the attention of the few patrons whose eyes had not already been locked on the spectacle. Karen just continued Heimliching herself. Sasuke settled back into his seat, content. All was back as it should be in the world of Sasuke. Ino stood threateningly from her chair. "What exactly do you mean by that? I came because you said you'd be treating me to curry buns, not to be propositioned." Quote. Karen shoved the other girl out of her way, and incidentally to the floor, and demanded breathlessly, "I get to carry your young? And we get to have?" Ino stood and sent an uppercut at the redhead's chin in one fluid movement. "What the hell?" the blonde began. "Focus back on the Uchiha. Makes you think I'd even be interested?" She finished with, it must be said, an intrigued look in her eye. "How dare you?" The medic raged, surging to her feet. "Sasuke is offering a threesome here, and you can't even." "Whoa, what?" Sasuke demanded, horrified. "I did not." "You sure?" Ino said, hands on her hips, "'Cause that's sure what it sounded like to me." "That's what I heard," a helpful voice from the other end of the restaurant called out. "I don't want to copulate with you people," Sasuke spat, eye twitching. Karen's eyes narrowed dangerously. "I don't like it when you mess with my emotions, Sasuke." She nodded seriously and said, "My cousin talked to me about this. Naruto says I can't let you treat me like that, and I think he's right. And he said that if you pulled anything, beating the hell out of you was the best way to." The dark-haired shinobi rolled his eye. "Naruto had to get into everything, didn't he? I don't want to do that with either of you. And it would take too long to restart my clan that way anyway." "No," his eye flashed, "I have a plan." "Oh, goody," Ino muttered. "This never ends well," Karen confided to the other girl. Then she turned back to consider the young man. "Sasuke, I can see why it might seem like a tempting option, but I think replacing all the samples at the sperm bank would be a lot harder than you seem to think. I mean, the sheer volume of replacement tissue it would require alone would." "No," Sasuke cut in loudly. Still too slow. I've created a jutsu. I just need both of your help to implement it. The girls glanced at each other. More out of morbid curiosity than anything else, Ino finally asked, and what jutsu is that? It will impregnate every woman in Konoha between the ages of 16 and 43. No, the young man shuddered, physical contact required. That's stupid, Ino snorted. It is not, Sasuke snapped. I'd like to see the elders try to exterminate my clan again when it would anger every family in the whole village. I think, the redhead corrected delicately, she meant the fact that it would cut the village's fighting force down by at least a third, send every husband, boyfriend, father, and, woman, out for your blood, and it wouldn't even work on every woman anyway. Well, that, Ino agreed, and the fact that the whole village found out your clan is genetically predisposed to insanity and obsession. Remember when that happened? It would so work. Sasuke snarled. Of course not, the blonde sighed. Karen crossed her arms and shook her head skeptically. What about women who are already pregnant? Or barren? Or, for that matter, have had a hysterectomy? Won't be a problem, Sasuke assured calmly. Ino sunk back into her chair, propped her elbow on the table and her head on her hand. This I gotta hear. Obviously the jutsu doesn't create a pregnancy the normal way, Sasuke snorted. So? Ino said tiredly. The jutsu is capable of creating its own womb if necessary. The child just needs the continued blood supply from the mother. Sasuke smiled smugly. It's even capable of correcting genetic problems in the embryo. Wait, Karen said slowly, a thought percolating at the back of her mind. If your technique can correct genetic abnormalities and doesn't require a womb then. And this finally seemed to be enough for Sasuke to turn vaguely sheepish. As it stands, the Uchiha admitted, it will likely also affect up to 20% of Konoha's men. Why you made an M-preg jutsu? Karen demanded, eyes wide. A what? Sasuke asked, confused. The two kunoichi glanced at each other. A lightning quick conversation passed between the two, made of only facial twitches and creatively expressive eyebrows. They turned back to the Uchiha. Let's talk details. At a table across the room from the trio, a young Chunin was the first to snap out of the horrified staring the rest of the room was still caught in. He turned to the other two members of his team and, wide-eyed, demanded, do you feel threatened? I feel threatened. Haru Yamada was a mid-level clerical nin. That was what he did. It was how he was happy. Nice and safe with his paperwork and his pen collection. Every once in a blue moon, when his brother-in-law's mocking went a little far, he'd wonder if he should have gone into one of the more traditional shinobi paths. The answer was no. Now and forever, the answer was no. He knew because he had volunteered to leave the secure bunker of the clerical catacombs, and damn if he didn't deserve a medal for that. But the village was in such a state of emergency that every spare man was out on the streets already and only he and the interns had been left, and now this had happened. It's just as I'm saying. Iruka shrieked to the clerk who'd been unfortunate enough to respond to the school's alarms. The children have gone wild. It's pandemonium in the hallways, knee-high ankle-biters darting out from the stairwells. The first years dragged Sito-sensei under the lunch table, screaming, and we haven't seen him since. As Haru flinched back from the distraught teacher, a pair of particularly scrawny 8-year-olds, arms filled with aerosol cans and lighter fluid, skidded to a stop behind the clerk's back. They gave Iruka an inquiring look. Without glancing away from the other man's face, Iruka made a shooing motion with one hand and said, as you were. What? The clerical nin pulled back in confusion, before glancing behind himself warily. But the students were already long gone. Several minutes later, as they stared proudly at the bonfire that used to be the school's library, the shorter of the pair paused long enough to grin smugly. I told you Iruka-sensei was cool. Suffice to say that things in Konoha were getting a little intense. And with everyone so on edge and those in charge of keeping the peace at their wits' end, each shinobi was expected to remain calm and ready to assist his fellows. Sai was proud to give any assistance he could, such as warning his peers when they were in danger. Sai smiled calmly at Yamato. Yamato cowered in horror and inched slowly backwards. The younger shinobi glanced between his elder and the beautiful woodland creatures arrayed around him. Sensing the man's confusion, Sai attempted to explain. They are angry because your jutsu training has destroyed their forest home. But, Yamato stuttered, looking at the vicious, ink, black creatures flexing claws and fangs in his direction. Those aren't real animals. Oh look, Sai observed mildly, they're attacking. Wah, ah. Sakura watched her teammates run, one of them shrieking, but then who could blame him, through the streets with a jaded stare. I should go do something about that, she told herself sternly. Then, with a decidedly shifty look, yawned loudly. Too bad I feel another nap, faint, coming on. With that, Sakura slumped contentedly against a conveniently located wall. Takeshi, something weird is going on. The tall boy waved his teammates' concern off. Konoha is always a little nuts, Megumi. You're just overreacting because you're bored. The pair watched in silence as yet another Hyuga walked fearlessly, and unhesitatingly, off of a second-story ledge. Megumi turned to stare at her tallest teammate, eyebrows raised. Takeshi shrugged, that's not even in my top 50. The violet-haired girl shook her head and grabbed Takeshi's arm to drag him behind her on her way to track down Kosada. He would work with her to find out what was going on. I'm okay. The downed Hyuga snapped from behind them. The two duckies slowed to a stop. Is it just me, Takeshi asked slowly, or was that Hajime's voice? Hajime wouldn't embarrass himself like that for all the soba in tea country, Megumi stated. I'm blind, not a paraplegic. The voice that was not Hajime snapped. After a beat of silence, Megumi admitted, that sounded like him. Then they turned back around to stare. On closer inspection, it was clear that the downed Hyuga was their irritable teammate. And it was easy to tell because Kaoru and Yahiko were standing over him, alternately mocking and concerned. Sharing one last look, the two duckies wandered over to the others. Once they had crossed the street, Megumi asked, what's going on? The group of gophers looked up at the intrusion. Kaoru perked up at seeing them. Hi guys. Help us convince Hajime that he's not blind. And that's necessary? Takeshi asked cautiously. Apparently, Yahiko said with a long-suffering sigh. It's not, because I am blind, Hajime hissed, batting Kaoru's hand aside with, it should be mentioned, excellent aim. Oh, Kaoru breathed suddenly, that's what you guys are doing. It gets the job done, Hajime said stoically. Yahiko blinked at his teammates before a look of understanding blossomed on his face. Oh, that'll work, I guess. The Hyuga pushed himself to his feet with impeccable dignity, and I suppose the Inuzuka have thought of something so much better? The cousins grinned in tandem. You could say that. Elsewhere in the village, the Inuzuka had no idea what Yahiko was talking about, no sir. They were having some issues though. Mostly because the Aburame were weird. And had odd priorities. And they were working on Sum's last nerve. That was her story and she was sticking to it. As it was, this was actually taking it a bit far. Like, really far. The Aburame clan was in mourning, which generally meant dressing in black and wandering around the village acting even more silent and morose than they normally did. They had reason of course, what with the memorial service for the innocents senselessly killed planned for later that day. And the Aburame were silently insisting that the Inuzuka attend, mostly by staring at them eerily from just beyond the boundaries of the dog clan's compound. Because, the Aburam's dark sunglasses seemed to accuse, the Inuzuka were responsible. They had slaughtered children of the Aburame clan. The least the mongrels could do was come pay their respects. With a low growl in her chest, Sume stamped her way to the main entrance of the compound. She planted her feet and barked, Shibi, get over here. There was, as ever, a silence in the milling throng of sunglass-clad shinobi. After several long seconds the clan head weaved his way to the front of the crowd to meet Sum's challenge. Is this really necessary? The woman demanded. Said Shibi. You're scarring the children, and the puppies won't even come out of the kennel. Yes, I'm serious, Sume snapped. You're taking this too far. It was a flea bath. Lee walked down the street by himself. Stop, consider that sentence. Now consider why it is the best sign you'll get that the end, of everything, is nigh. First is the fact that Lee walked anywhere. Lee did not walk. He ran. He skipped and sauntered. He dashed and frolicked and charged. He danced and trotted and raced precariously on his hands, and occasionally he limped, but he never walked. And second, Lee never went anywhere by himself. This was partially because Lee was a social creature, many would say obnoxiously so, and found friends wherever he went, whether they wanted him to or not, and partially because for the past year he'd had something of a stalker problem. Of course, Lee wouldn't say it was stalkers or a problem. No, he would say that his loving and beloved students simply wished to learn the ways of youth with every fiber in their vigorous little bodies and only wished for guidance. Everyone else said it crossed the line once the amorphous glob of green spandex Lee swore was made of 3 separate children had a raging, knock-down, drag-out fight over who got to wear Lee's spandex once he tragically, but inevitably, lost his life in glorious combat. Lee, who was the sole heir interested in Guy's own leotard, but was nevertheless willing to fight to the death for its possession, saw nothing strange about it. But now he was walking, and he was alone. 10:10, on the other side of the street, stopped in her tracks as she watched him pass by. Only she didn't so much watch him as her mind froze into a state that might, in a more technologically advanced world, be called a blue screen of death. But in this reality, she did not go into a blue screen of death and so did not reboot. Instead, what we might picture as the hamster wheel of her mind slowly cranked out the only possible explanation. With a nearly audible ding, or what we might imagine to be the sound of a hamster nabbing a dangling piece of carrot, she arrived at the answer. Pod people. Everybody run. What? Anko, across the street on a bi-hourly dango run, demanded shrilly. Orochimaru is here? Where did he hide the rest of the bodies? And that's when the real panic hit the streets. My face, my face. Monkey wailed tiredly, marching waveringly onward. For hour 7 of his sprint, he was holding up remarkably well. His comrades, his many, many comrades, followed behind him in a long train, making occasional grabs at the aforementioned mask in an attempt to save the agent's life. Taking her scheduled turn, Sparrow reached out and gave the mask a yank. Unlike all the times before, it went flying and landed in the grass several feet away with a gentle clink. As one, the assembled Anbu turned and blinked down at it. The agent previously known as Monkey looked left, then right, then shuffled over to the mask and hunkered down next to it. He looked up at his fellows' blank white faces, shrugged, and picked it up. I'm on duty, he explained earnestly. It's against regulations to be without your mask while on duty. So he put it back on. A beat. It's eating my beautiful face. The poor man shrieked. And the chase was on. And therefore, Kakashi continued to the stupefied crowd, Icha Icha is now the sacred text of Konoha and must be taught in all schools. The man clasped his hands gleefully and beamed into his future subjects' horrified faces. Isn't it wonderful? Smiling manically, Sakura marched the last few steps to Naruto's apartment door. Naruto, get your butt out here. Her grin spread even wider at the thought of Naruto's face when he heard the news. They had done it. The shinobi of Konoha had very succinctly proven their point. Konoha nin knew their Hokage. And more to the point, they knew their next Hokage. And that was Naruto. Sakura's smile slowly melted into a frown as she failed to hear the grumbling complaints and shuffling that she had expected. Naruto, how bad was he really feeling? When they had first heard the news that Tsunade didn't think he was ready, he had said he was fine. That, Granny knew best. And then immediately said he didn't feel well and was going to go lay down. You couldn't blame the poor guy, but she would still expect Naruto to be bouncing back up at the first hint of good news come banging at his door. That's just who he was. I'm coming in, okay? She called through the door. She pulled the spare key out of her hip pouch, turned the lock, and pushed her way inside. Listen, I've got good. Sakura froze in the doorway. The apartment was a mess. And not a young bachelor who lives alone mess, or even a Naruto searching desperately for ramen mess. No, this was a home invasion, assassins in the rafters, burglars sneaking in through the windows mess. Oh, and there was blood on the carpet. Somehow, she didn't think Naruto was home. All right, the young man called through a sharp grin. He was holding court at the largest table at the casino, and it was obvious why all eyes were on him. To sum it up, he very obviously came from old money. It was in the way he held himself, not trying to show off his wealth, in the form of fine clothing, finer jewelry, and protection charms and seals that left, priceless, in the dust. So much as completely oblivious that everyone didn't have it, and completely unsurprised by the number of admirers and hangers-on that clung to his sides. Or maybe he was a runaway monk of some order or another. Enough of them came from the nobility and he certainly seemed to have divine luck. And if he wasn't from old money? He was certainly rich now. The youth downed a shot of something hard and so sweet he didn't even notice the burn and shook 2 dice in his hand. With a devilish curl of the lips he held his hand out in invitation for one of the barely dressed women on his side to lean in, just a little too far to be entirely innocent, and blow on the dice. "For luck, right?" the blonde asked, innocent and glib. The woman leaned even closer and smiled coyly. "Right, luck. Oh yeah," the youth purred before turning back to the game at hand. He had a large pile of chips by his elbow, a not inconsiderable fortune by itself, that had just kept growing all night. But hey, everyone was having a good time. Even the owners of the casino, watching their money pile up in someone else's coffer, were having a good time. Because this young man, well, he just had a certain charm to him. But then, the young, rich, blonde man wasn't actually doing anything too interesting. He wasn't even cheating, so who really cares about him? We have more important things to focus on. Things like this. Konoha is on fire. Well, to be more accurate, Konoha was on fire. Past tense. Now it's just slightly singed in some areas and lightly smoking in others. Pleasant almost, smells like a campfire. Nothing to worry about. And that's exactly how the PR department will sell it to wary clients and the daimyo's budget department when they're inevitably asked uncomfortable questions about the flammability of the average shinobi, property damage measured in metric tons of debris, and why the giant monster fox having a temper tantrum in the middle of a residential district was completely ignored for going on 45 minutes. The PR department will quietly fail to mention that it was mostly the shinobi who had been lighting the fires. But that's not the point. No, fire safety is different in Konoha than in most other communities. And so is fire insurance. The people lighting the fires had had one eye on rioting and one eye on the newly instituted, quietly held adage of the village. That being to flagrantly commit arson whensoever it was remotely possible to pass it off as an accident. This seemed like a strange rule to teach small children and professional assassins of dubious mental stability until you realized that accidental fire damages were paid for by the daimyo. The village also quietly failed to mention that Yamato could grow back the whole village's worth of buildings in about a week and a half with nothing but a scattering of seeds to start with. Hey, in Konoha buildings might grow on trees but money still didn't. But that was beside the point. A conscientious observer might ignore all that and instead think to ask why the monster fox with anger management issues was ignored for so long. The answer came down to, he had been only one in a crowd of those rioting, or panicking, but that sounds so tacky when you're describing shinobi or giant spirit beasts. That's still what they were doing though. Tsunade on the other hand, she was on a rampage. And why wouldn't she be? Her chosen heir cum adopted grandson, not to mention one of the only blood relatives she had left, had been stolen out of his own apartment while an entire village had broken down around him to support his bid for taking her throne early. So really, what did she have to be angry about? Plenty as it turned out. In a mostly cinder-free corner of the village, the duckies sat huddled together and didn't make a sound. They sat that way for an indeterminable time before Kosada let out a wet sniffle and burrowed further into Megumi's side. The girl let him, raising her arm to make more room for him against her side, but she quietly resented the necessity. She shouldn't have to do that. Naruto-sensei usually sat between her and Kosada. Naruto-sensei should be getting snot and tears rubbed into his shoulder, not her. Takeshi, on the other hand, was an old hat at it and didn't comment on the growing wet spot Megumi left on his own shoulder. "I don't get it," Takeshi said eventually. "You don't get anything, moron, that's not new," Megumi muttered without bothering to raise her head from his neck. "Well, yeah, but this time I really don't get it," the tall boy asserted. "I mean, Naruto-sensei being taken out? Naruto-sensei? Didn't he, like, win an entire war by himself 3 years ago?" "No," Kosada said, looking up to stare at Takeshi's strangely out of red-rimmed eyes. "Naruto-sensei led the offensive, but it was the combined effort and will of every shinobi from every nation that won the war." Takeshi said indulgently. "If you say so." He shook his head, "but that doesn't negate my point. Naruto-sensei is badass. How could he have been?" Takeshi swallowed and started again. How could anyone have beat Naruto-sensei? Especially without the whole village noticing when, he blew a 1,000-foot crater into the surrounding bedrock. Kosada blinked. "He does tend to do that, doesn't he? That's my point." Takeshi enthused. Megumi cut the wind out from under him. They probably took him by surprise. Even the strongest fighter is still human, and Naruto-sensei was in his apartment, in the middle of his village, where he felt safe. And he wasn't feeling well, he was upset. He couldn't have been on his guard. There was a long silence before Takeshi slammed his fist into the ground hard enough to leave a small crater in his wake. No, damn it. Naruto-sensei has to be alive. Takeshi. No. Think about it. It makes no sense to kill him and then take his body. If you kill him, leave the body to make a statement. What's the point of killing someone like Naruto-sensei and then not taking credit? Kosada shrugged unhappily. To create an opportunity to invade in the chaos that his absence would cause while simultaneously taking out the strongest defender Konoha has? The other two blinked at him. What? The short boy muttered. I'm just saying. Yeah, Takeshi said after a moment, except that no one has attacked. And at this point, the longer they wait, the only thing that's going to happen is that Konoha will get more and more organized, and more angry. Quote, maybe that's what they want, Megumi wondered aloud. Maybe whoever did it doesn't want to attack Konoha. Maybe they want Konoha to attack someone else. Well, crap, maybe we should tell someone? Kosada looked between his teammates for support. We can't let the village play into someone else's hands like that. Peeved, like they won't know? Takeshi ruffled the shorter boy's hair. If you could figure it out, I doubt village intelligence had trouble. But that still doesn't explain taking his body. Megumi argued hotly. Wouldn't finding his bloody corpse hanging in the town square have made any attack by us faster and bloodier? She relaxed her fists enough that her nails stopped cutting into her palms to face her teammates. The two boys were pale-faced. Takeshi especially looked to be on the verge of puking. Megumi blinked. Nice imagery there, the tall boy muttered. Exactly my point, the girl exclaimed. So, Kosada began. Maybe they're trying to get us to attack, but they also need Naruto-sensei for something. The boy shook his head. But almost all of Naruto-sensei's best attacks are combinations of spiritual and chakra control combined in new ways. His body won't give up much information, and by now everyone knows that Kurama is barely tied to him. Plus seals like Naruto-sensei's disintegrate with the bearer's death, so they wouldn't get anything out of that either. Then they must need him for something, not just his body, Megumi said as she thought it out. Then Naruto-sensei might still be alive, Takeshi said through a tight throat. The genin clutched each other, faces burning with all the determination that made them Team 7. Let's go get sensei back. Meanwhile, there was a very important meeting taking place in the Hokage's office. It was important mostly because, spitting in the face of everything the shinobi nations had accomplished in the past years, Konoha was on the brink of declaring war. Proving once again that every war council should have a child member, to point out the obvious that everyone else is far too smart to notice, and that Junin crazy was a viable disability. Sakura paced angrily in front of the line of Konoha's strongest and most influential. Strange how it mostly turned out to be people she'd interacted with regularly since the age of 12. She ran a hand through her hair and turned on her heel to face everyone and burst out, "Can't you see this is the last thing Naruto would want? Are we really going to go against everything Naruto would have wanted to obliterate the ones who did this? Oh, well then, never mind." "Yeah," Kakashi said, cocking his head slightly. "That was my plan." "Oh, well, when you put it that way. I'll get my battle axe," Sakura said brightly. "So much for that then. We can't do this," Hinata said firmly. "Naruto would never forgive us if we started a war over him. And we don't even have any proof that Iron Country was involved. Except that they were baying for his blood yesterday afternoon," Tsunade said archly, crossing her arms. "And just look at their leader," Sasuke snarled. Kakashi frowned. "What do you mean? Mifune has never shown himself to be particularly bloodthirsty. But he's so old, he must be evil. And since Kitsuchi has taken over as Tsuchikage, that samurai bastard is the only old codger left." "You're afraid of old people," Sakura said it in a voice that made it clear she didn't want to believe it but had also been around for too much clan ninja crazy to hold on to doubt. She closed her eyes and repressed the urge to sigh. "Of course you are." Sasuke just narrowed his good eye and hissed. "Behold," Ino said dully, "the father of the next generation." "It's not a phobia," Sasuke snapped. "A phobia is irrational." There was a moment of silence as everyone else in the room shared a glance over Sasuke's head. "We didn't mention it being." "You know what?" Tsunade said, "Never mind. What we? And you, the one-eyed shinobi accused, you're the worst of all." You're not only an old hag, but you hide it, as if we can't smell it one you. Okay, creepy, Ino put in. Think about it, Sasuke said, implored really, as he turned to face the other ninja under 50 in the room. Old people have committed all the worst evils of our world. Sure, Nagato and Obito made some unfortunate choices. Sasuke allowed with a dismissive handwave, but that was only because they were manipulated into doing it by their elders. But, Shikamaru said, that's not. Naruto turned them both back to the side of good by talking to them for, minus the time taken for explosions, about 10 minutes each. But they still. 10 minutes, Sasuke repeated. Okay, fine, Shikamaru said, throwing his hands up with more energy than he normally did anything but seek vengeance. But 2 data points don't. Madara is the oldest person anyone here has ever met, Sasuke said. And he was a sweet little kid who only wanted to make friends and protect his family and then grew up into an unmitigated monster that even Naruto didn't try to save. Well, yes, Shikamaru admitted, uncomfortable now, but Danzo, Sasuke said, steely-eyed. But, the Nara tried. Danzo, Sasuke repeated. I see your point. Are we going to keep going with the crazy or get back on topic? Ino demanded. Because I can leave. I can go right now and leave you to it. I'll join you, Sakura said with relief. There was a reason Sakura had clung to Ino like a leech in the academy, and it hadn't only been because of the ribbon and the peer pressure. Mostly it was because even as a small child Sakura could recognize someone who didn't put up with bullshit. But before Sasuke could complain or Shikamaru could express his outrage at being lumped in with one-eye McTrader pants, Iruka barged his way into the surprisingly accessible secret meeting. The teacher, as per usual, looked agitated. He looked over the group of Junin, Anbu, and council members, visibly decided to hell with it, and declared, I can't find the duckies. Really? Homura asked snidely. The village goes into crisis and the first thing you do is hunt down a bunch of genin? Yes, I'm a teacher, it's instinct, and I can't find the kids. Naruto's or Sakura's? Sakura's head snapped around. What? Besides the momentary panic, finding the genin really wasn't an issue. Because Sakura, overworked yes, but also overprotective and paranoid of being left behind, had bugged the shit out of her students. Okay, so she may have inked the tattoo for a reverse summoning into the skin just behind their ears while they were sleeping. Or possibly sedated. But hypodermic needles were slippery and Konoha General just happened to keep needles filled with enough tranquilizer to sedate a moose readily on hand, okay? It made sense when you thought about their typical pool of patients. Besides, Junin-sensei did creepier thing than that all the time. Really? Seriously, Lee's students had been 3 separate people before he got to them. That had to count for something. But the important part of all this was that it didn't take more than a second and a well-executed expulsion of chakra to have a tiny slug pop into existence on Hajime's shoulder. And as the duckies had gone running to their new, nigh unstrikable friends before leaving on their epic quest to reclaim their sensei, and future Hokage, from what had to be an impossibly strong and cunning enemy. They never even stood a chance. The Hyuga pulled up short to stare at the summoned creature making itself comfortable on his shoulder. He sighed, resigned. Damn, what? Megumi demanded, stopping alongside the boy with impatience written all over her face. We don't have time to stop. Yeah, what's the big? Yahiko trailed off, staring at the slug with wide eyes before his shoulders slumped. Well, there goes this trip. What? Kosada asked, several trees ahead of the others. He bounded back over to the others, eager to get going. We have to move. Oh no you don't. The duckies flinched as Sakura-sensei's harsh voice came out of nowhere. What the hell is that? Takeshi demanded, looking wildly into the surrounding trees. It's Sakura-sensei, Kaoru muttered, biting her lip. Her summon animals, the slugs, can transmit her voice so. You get your butts back here this instant. The scary medic Nin's voice continued unimpeded. Where the hell did you brats run off to? A new voice joined their sensei's. Now is not the time to throw a temper tantrum and rebel. And I should know. There are plenty of good times to rebel, now isn't one of them. Sasuke, Sakura-sensei again, muffled as if she had put a hand over a mic, stop corrupting the children. I'm just. Everybody shut up. The Hokage's voice blared, nearly shaking the trees with its intensity. You need not concern yourselves, a familiar voice crooned. I have taken care of the issue. Kurama, Kosada spoke into the sudden silence. He leaned closer to the slug. What exactly do you mean by that? I've summoned the council, Kurama said lowly. The duckies could all but hear the fox's tail curling smugly over his toes. The duckies stared down at the slug, and by proxy the fox at the other end of the connection, for a long moment before, as one, breathing, oh no. The Council of Nine was unique in that it was both nothing and exactly like you would expect. It was a meeting of the 9 Biju, some of the most powerful spirit entities the world over. It was also, at its core, an awkward family engagement between 9 estranged siblings who would really rather be elsewhere, or at least be very drunk if they were forced to attend. This did not make summoning the Council of 9 in the center of the smoking remains of Konoha seem like any better of an idea. Of course, trying to cancel the meeting was an unspeakably worse idea, so there wasn't much to be done except lead the children and civilians to the most heavily fortified shelters and then coordinate which member of each response team was going to claim a choice spot to watch the action and which was going to bring the snacks. And because we're trying to be pragmatic and truthful here, the Anbu would need to be given at least another 7 to 8 minutes leeway to argue over whether to bring popcorn or takoyaki. But, and focus now, the point was that the Biju were, this very minute, converging on the village. Yeah, the PR department wasn't even going to try to field this one. There was one bright spot to all this though. Long story short, Gaara was coming. Long story a little longer, after the end of the last war, the Biju had by and large not been forced back into their former prisons as the atomic bombs of the ninja world. Instead, with Naruto and his large, disappointed eyes acting as a moderator, they had signed treaties with their former villages and settled uneasily in the surrounding territories. Despite this, there was still bad blood between the shinobi and the spirit beasts, and reconciliation was slow. Except, people were equally unsurprised and flabbergasted to learn, between the young Case-Cage and the One-Tail. In fact, the bond between Gaara and Shukaku was far stronger than that between the One-Tail and any previous Jinchuriki. It even went so far that Shukaku regularly submitted to carrying Gaara on long journeys, significantly decreasing travel time while increasing the Case-Cage's safety. It was a great honor for all of Wind Country. Well, okay, initially it had been seen more as a mortifying embarrassment than an honor. Mostly because Shukaku didn't so much submit to carry Gaara as he picked the young Case-Cage up like a kitten, with his teeth, and carried him off whenever the Biju felt like going on a stroll. But with the adage that confidence was everything, the village hidden in the sand embraced Shukaku as the noble bearer of the Case-Cage. At least that's how their PR department was selling it. And Gaara, well, Gaara got to nap on the way to wherever it turned out they were going. Gaara liked naps. Gaara was not napping now. Now, Gaara was angry. It's interesting to note that very few people had ever seen Gaara angry, and to no one's surprise, none of those who had were yet living. Whole villages had seen Gaara sad or disappointed or determined. Or sleepy. That was also frightening, but never angry. But wait, that same conscientious observer from before might think, when Gaara was a child he couldn't go a week without going into a blood rage. See, that's where this gets interesting. Because those murderous rampages? They had been influenced by the One-Tail and emotional trauma and severe sleep deprivation, yes, but really? That had been Gaara when he was feeling playful. Now? Someone was going to wish he was in a playful mood. Naruto stretched and leaned back against the dank wall behind him. This isn't so bad really, the blonde said to himself as he often did when he was alone. Mostly because it was a handy way to work exposition into a manga sequence. I mean, as a lonely childhood had trained him to. Sure, kinda dark and uncomfortable, he continued, scratching distractedly at the seals inked onto his wrists. But I get to meet new people, and that Roki guy seems really excited about the whole thing. Naruto paused in consideration, I mean, also kinda nuts, but still, excited. So, not so bad. There was a great burst of power and sound from the walls around the blonde, causing the world to shake, dust and bits of brick to fall from above, and Naruto to shield his head with his arms. Naruto, flinching backwards against the wall, muttered, as long as that doesn't get free. He let out a vaguely hysterical laugh. Yeah, that would be bad. That's all for now. If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments.